नमस्ते सबैजनालाई। हाम्रो नियमित कार्यक्रम हामीले सुरु गर्न गइरहेको छौँ। यस कार्यक्रमको हामीले रेकर्ड पनि गर्ने गरेका छौँ। नमस्ते फेरि पनि सबैजनालाई। हामीले यो कार्यक्रमलाई रेकर्ड गर्ने गरेका छौँ र आजको कार्यक्रमको सञ्चालन हाम्रो जादुजीले गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ। हाम्रो अतिथिहरू पनि आइसक्नु भएको छ। अब मैले यो माइक्रोफोन चाहिँ जादुजीलाई हस्तान्तरण गर्छु। ल जादुजी।
धन्यवाद दाइ, धन्यवाद। आजको प्रोग्रामलाई चाहिँ यसरी अगाडि गरौँला। सबैजनालाई नमस्ते है। आजको प्रोग्राम दुईटा पार्टमा गरौँ भन्ने सल्लाह भएको छ हाम्रो प्रोफेसर चेम्जोङसित। त्यसअनुसार म पहिलेको पार्टमा 30 मिनट्स जति चाहिँ 30-40 हाउ लङ डज इट गो त्यति चाहिँ हाम्रो बारबरा एन्थ्रोपोलोजिस्टसँग कुरा गर्छु। त्यसपछि ब्याक एन्ड फोर्थ त गर्दै गरौँला इन बिट्विन, इभन प्रोफेसर चेम्जोङ विल जोइन इन बिट्विन एज वेल। अनि एट द एन्ड हामी तपाईँहरूले पठाउनु भएको प्रश्नहरू लेखेर पठाउनु भएको नेपाली पोस्टको डिएममा त्यो हामी सोध्छौँ हाम्रो गेस्टहरूलाई। त्यसरी अगाडि बढाउँदा ठिक होला जस्तो लागेको छ। तपाईँहरूले टपिकको बारेमा त थाहा नै पाउनु भएको छ। हामी महिला हिरोहरू अथवा महिला नायकहरू किन विस्मृत हुँदै जान्छन् भन्ने विषयमा आजको कार्यक्रम गर्न गइरहेका छौँ। हाम्रो गेस्टले यही विषयमा रिसर्च गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँले लामो समय नेपालसित रहेर पनि काम गर्नुभएको छ। सम्भवतः उहाँको परिचय उहाँ आफैले नै दिनुहुन्छ होला। त्यसरी अगाडि बढ्दा बेटर पनि हुन्छ होला। ल अब यसलाई सुरु गर्दाखेरि okay, Barbara, are you listening to me? Am I audible?
Yes, here I am. Namaste.
Namaste. Namaste. Okay, so we are going to begin the session, and like our prior sessions, normally what we do, we make it in two parts. In the very first part, we make a conversation with our expert or our guest or panelist, whatever you want to say. And in second part, normally we take the questions from floor, and today we are planning to take the questions by DM, and we'll put forward those questions in second session of our today's discussion. And Professor Zemjong will join you back and forth in between, and he will comment about the things, what's going on in anthropological society in Nepal and the role of females, as well as so many other things, what exactly is happening in Department of Anthropology as he's chairing the department of Syvon University. So to begin the session, I would like you to introduce yourself by you. I think it would be appropriate if you tell me about you and your connection to Nepal and your work a little bit, and we'll discuss further more about this in coming questions. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to Nepali Post. This is a completely new format for me, and I was delighted that author Neelam Niharika introduced me to it, and she also introduced me to Giresh Pokhrel, who set up today's program. So this is exciting for me, and it looks easy enough for me to manage. And I prefer audio, and it seems as if this can be a wonderful dialogue for us. So I'll try to be brief because we're dealing with 50 years of my experience with Nepal. Is it 50? Yes. So I arrived there in 1969 as a PhD student to begin my research. I was at the University of London working with Professor Pure Heibendorf, who at that time was the well-known foreign anthropologist working in the Himalayas, and he had specialized at that time with Sherpa people. So in those days, we disappeared into the mountains or into a village and didn't come out for a year. It was difficult enough to get in. And anyway, that was the custom at the time. So I traveled by foot from, I forget if it was Barabise, the first, where we got off the bus and walked up to Solu and moved around from village to village for a few weeks and decided there was a settlement of Tibetan refugees, and I decided to work with them because I'd already learned some Tibetan in London. So the result of that was my PhD, and then a book called Tibetan Frontier Families, which is available in Nepal because the second edition, after I traveled to Tibet itself, was published by Vajra in Kathmandu. So it's available in Nepal, but I'm trying to arrange for it to be available through Amazon here. In any case, from 1970 to 1980, I moved around largely Solu area, continuing research with Tibetans on Tibetan history and culture. And I was very pleased with my work because up to that point, Tibetan studies was dominated by Buddhologists who only used texts and only resourced Lama scholars. So I initiated the study of sociology in Tibetan culture. And since then, we've had dozens, if not hundreds, of mainly anthropologists, sociologists, now looking at Tibet in a deeper cultural way. And I don't know if we've marginalized the Buddhologists because they still are very productive. But I was very pleased with that effort. And I thought, okay, by 1980, I should move on to another part of Nepal. And for some reason, I don't know quite why, I decided to go east. And I actually, I at that time had maybe a personal drive, personal motivation, a personal search, we have to, I would say now, because I wanted to understand the experience of pilgrimage. And of course, Nepal and the Himalayas, but not just the Himalayan, the hills are replete with tirtha, and people are constantly going to holy places, either on pilgrimage or to make their prayers, because that's where the deities reside, and that's where. Well, I hardly have to explain this to a listenership of Nepalis. So I began that work and made my way across the mountains into the Aran Valley, thinking I would go up the Aran River further, where I knew of some caves that were written about or important. There were some mela held there. And the day that I arrived, I stayed the night at an ashram where 32 other women were living, all of them Hindu women. And eventually I never went further north. That was became the place of my pilgrimage in so many ways. The summit, you could say, or the consummation. And I learned very quickly that these women were all, almost all, former devotees or still devotees of Yogamaya Neopane, who had passed away almost exactly 40 years before my arrival. And I had a Sherpa colleague, and he was my interpreter initially. So I learned about her, and I also learned she passed away in 1940. She was born in 1867, 68. And I also learned about another woman born about 40 years after Durga Devi. Her name after Yogmaya. Her name is Durga Devi Gimeri, and she passed away 1973, just 7 years before my arrival there. And I began to study the history of both of these women who were no longer present, but who were living through local people, and especially these Bhaktini with whom I resided. And from my research with them, I eventually published a book called Heir to a Silent Song. It was published by CNAS at TU. And this research was in the 80s. It's important to point out. I went back about 5 times to the Valley. Number one, because I shared my work with the eminent poet and communist leader of Parizat, who you will all know. And I shared this with her, and she was very excited to learn about Yogmaya because, she was a well-read woman. She was a political activist herself. And my introduction to Parizat about Yogamaya was the first that she'd heard. So she helped me. Sangrala, who's now a well-known poet with you, he also helped translate the Yogbani, the utterances of Yogmaya. And so we, so they encouraged me to continue the work. And also I was in touch with Dr. Harka Gurung, who at that time also was very excited to learn about Yogmaya's mission, her campaign. And I presented 2 papers at conferences by 1990. And there wasn't much public interest, despite these people who I shared this with. But nevertheless, we published the material. And CNAS, their role was very important in publishing the book. And again, Nepal was just coming out of the dictatorship and into democracy. My work in the 80s, of course, many of you know the political atmosphere. So any discussion of an early political activist, both Durga Devi, although she did not challenge the political leadership as Yogmaya did, Durga Devi was a rebel. She attacked the corruption. She championed women and also used the courts to win cases that no one, especially a woman, would dare to do. One case is in favor of women claimants. Excuse me. So that work laid there for a while. Perhaps people were nervous about taking it up under the dictatorship, and even in the early years, the 90s, even though Nepal became a constitutional monarchy, there was still, I think, a reticence to go into this. But gradually, there was interest, especially by people from Bhojpur, which, of course, is in the Aran River Valley. and a few people took up the issue using my work, namely Tim Sina, Matrika Timsina, who lives in Kadbari, and Dipesh Neopani. And they've continued to do work, especially on Yogmaya Neopani. But again, this remained largely in a circle of scholars from that part of Nepal. And I myself had become, as a result of my work with Parizad, not only my work, but her influence on me politically. I was awakened, you could say, politically, because, and I'd like to talk about this later on, how anthropologists largely are part of the British Empire, going into communities all over the world and pretending to be scientific, but in fact are very much influenced by the white colonial structure that we are part of. And I was part of that. I was part of the community who feel that we are superior and we must learn about other people. And we are, our cultural standard is the dominant and right one. And we gather information about minority groups, whether they're in Nepal or America or Ghana. And through my work with Parizad, which was very subtle, actually, I became politicized. Because I was studying two early Nepali characters who were. I had to understand the politics of Nepal and the atmosphere of Nepal in order to appreciate them. And doing that, I also got a bigger, wider understanding of anthropology and the issues any activist has to confront in the course of trying to change their society. And so I can say I left my Nepal studies to work in the Middle East. And I'll explain that if anyone's interested later on. And then for various reasons, my first book on the Tibetans was republished in a new edition, and I started to return to Nepal about 12 years ago on a regular basis. And by then also other scholars had started to work not on Durga Devi, but on Yogamaya Neopani, and I met them and they encouraged me. And then I think it was 1918, many of you will know that the book Yogamaya won the Madan Puraskar, and it is a historical novel written by Neelam Karki Niharika, and that propelled, I think, Yogamaya into another stage and into another place in Nepali history and culture. And here we are today.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this connection started with Tibetan thing and ended with this revolutionary women of Nepal, right? Women of Nepal.
Yes.
Okay, and why Yogamaya? This question always comes because you have seen the world, you've been in different zone, and you came to there, and how this women hero is like similar or different to other female heroes that you have seen so far throughout the world. Where does she stand, and why it made you to get encouraged to research about her, write a book about her? Anything that really struck your mind?
Well, it's that's the nature of a revolutionary. That they themselves, their inner power, their words, and learning what they accomplished impacts you. You just wake up and it's curiosity. We all, I think, meet that. We all are drawn to certain books, to certain figures in our lives over others. It's even though I didn't meet her, she passed 40 years before I arrived there. She lived through her survivors, her followers, and in her words, because luckily, fortunately, there was a collection of the Yogabadi, which was published in 1940 in Kalimpong, I think. And that's what also gripped Paris and Dr. Guru when they read these lines. I mean, these are very high quality, not just quality, but very powerful verses. And when you read those, and I had to study them even to get the English, you realize this is an extraordinary person. And the same with Durga Devi, learning about what she did in 1930, say, or coming to the aid, a lone woman coming to the aid of a raped deaf girl in Kadbari, and alone going to the courts, and alone trying to find the perpetrator, and alone going to the courts again, fighting as a widow for her land and winning, and on and on. I mean, it's not just at that time in Nepali history. It's at any time today that people succeed in a court case that is very unusual, where the chances of victory are not good, or when we read a poem that knocks us over. It's in the power of the person. And I think also I was ready in my life. I needed a hero, maybe because my mother had just passed partway through my work in the Aran Valley, maybe because politically I was awakened, and yet I was still, looking for a framework for my political action, and I needed an idea. I had no ideology. I had no political ideology before I encountered these two women. And I'll just say briefly, we can talk about this maybe later. Both of these women, Yogamaya and Durga Devi, were marginalized after they passed. Well, of course, Yogamaya confronted the Rana leadership and eventually martyred herself, and was banned by the government, and all traces of her, the government tried to wipe out, and it was forbidden to discuss her, etc., etc. And for many years, people were terrified to mention her, and her followers scattered, those who survived. And with Durga Devi, she was considered a madwoman, and people also dismissed her. She was just crazy. Well, the kinds of things we say that about women and other people today who go against the mainstream, who dare to confront the just customs of the day, who dare to challenge the laws of the day. And so both women were almost erased from history. And now, thanks to the fantastic work by historians, but particularly feminist historians, since the 70s and the feminist revolution, I would call it a revolution around the world, and partly also influenced by the African American civil rights movement, we are re-examining women in history, and we're learning how many very accomplished people we've had preceding us, although they were marginalized. And we really have to dig them out. We have to go into their records and do historical research to bring them back. And when we learn what they did, we ourselves as a community become more empowered. We believe in ourselves more. Oh my goodness, this woman from Denmark was able to do something fantastic in 1910 and then we didn't know about it. Or another woman from Nepal in 1910, 1920 was able to confront and make demands for change against the Rana leadership. My goodness, and we are learning about this. So this is very, very exciting, and some wonderful work is being done.
Thank you. And when you were researching at that time, I think this name was not so much known to whole Nepal. I think only few districts and people surrounded by those areas knew about Yogmaya and these female heroes we are talking about. How easy it was or how difficult it was for you to find out so many facts and maybe so many fictions were there regarding these characters. If I remember, we used to hear so many fictional things. Yogmaya is a more fictional character than factual character to me when I was growing. How difficult it was for you to find out things related to her at a time, at a procedure of your research or something.
Well, I had two. I had two very important supporters. One was Parizat. And if Parizat endorsed Yogamaya and Durga Devi and read the poems, the Bani in the original Nepali, and were impacted by those, that endorsed my work. And then I also had Dr. Harkaguru, who again read that work, who talked with me, who he knew somebody from Bhojpur who was a minister at that time in the government, and called that man. His name was Dambar Bahadur Basnet, and Dr. Gurung. The three of us sat together, and Dr. Gurung was listening to the stories by Dambar Bahadur Basnet, who had been a child at the time that Yogamaya, just before she passed away, and was, and he was a man who traveled all over Nepal. So those two people encouraged me very, very much. And I had no encouragement from the scholars at all at the university. But also in the early 80s, again, if Yogamaya had any reputation outside because of the government banishing her and denouncing her, they called her a communist. They called her a prostitute because she encouraged remarriage of widows, and she had more than one partner at various times herself, and so she was, as often happens with rebels, they're painted with a brush that diminishes them and makes them unattractive to others because there's jealousy, because they are so extraordinary.
Okay, at that time, 50, 60 years back, our society, of course, was not at the stage where we are. As a foreigner, as a white woman traveling there, and how welcoming was that society? It was really a different society than that.
Very welcoming. Very welcoming. I mean, first of all, you're on your own. You're completely at people's mercy. You walk into a village and you're on your own. So there may have been suspicions by authorities, but um, essentially on your day-to-day work and in your interviews, you're on your own. You depend on people, and if you depend on them, they trust you. I trust them, and they trust me. And I'm curious. If you're curious about people, and you have to be genuine to stay there. It's hard work. Interviewing is hard work, not the living in the mountains. And your curiosity drives you. And as you learn more, um, I mean, the elderly women who told me these stories, they just loved me, and they fed me, they cooked for me, you know, we had a lot of fun together. They called my assistant Nati. He was a 20-year-old fellow that helped me translate. And it's not difficult if you trust people and if you're curious. I think maybe that applies anywhere, doesn't it?
Exactly, exactly. As you mentioned earlier, like you are representing British empires, so and so, and at that time you're feeling kind of outsider there. Now, after down to 50 years, do you feel insider inside Nepal, or you still feel okay? I'm from outside, just trying to know about this, just as a researcher. Hello, hello, Barbara, are you there?
Sorry, I forgot to press the button. Yeah. So I'm an outsider. I don't pretend I'm an insider. As close as I am to some people, almost family, I would say there might be half a dozen people in Nepal. We're almost family. Um, but I'm an outsider. I don't pretend otherwise. The fact that we're speaking in English rather than Nepali reinforces that. But even a Nepali speaking American, if I would feel an outsider, I'm an outsider with Tibetans. I mean, why pretend? You know, um, there are things that I see Nepalis or Tibetans do that shock me. But if I were Nepali, I would also be shocked, maybe, right? I mean, um, and also I have had a political transformation. Uh, I don't want to take too much time. Uh, I'm 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 white, and I sound white, and I was white and part of the British imperial structure until I met Parizad and became politicized. And my real origin, my heritage, is Arab. And here I was speaking in Tibetan, but I didn't know Arabic. Here I was, studying Buddhism, but I didn't know Islam. And that is why later on, after I became politicized, I decided to go to the Middle East, to the Arab lands, and work there. I still feel an outsider there, of course. But, that's life. I mean, you can't, maybe if I had married a Nepali or a Tibetan, and had children with them, I'm sure I'd feel differently.
Okay, let's go back a little bit again to Yogmaya. Focus there. When you keep Yogmaya in very larger frame, okay, in global framework, and keep with other female heroes that all recognize it, where do you find her? Like, where does she stand actually? Like, the world really knows about it or not? That's a secondary thing. But when you observe this figure in front of all the figures that world has recognized. So where do you find Yogmaya and Durga Devi and other female heroes of Nepal?
Well, we have to put them with the others. It's up to us. They are not known. There are many books now, some extremely good books about women hidden from history, which include women from the European countries, African American, African, Asian, etc. And you don't find a Nepali there. You find Indian there. We have to put them there, and we have to argue and show that what they accomplished is equal to what other women elsewhere have done, and maybe even provides a new model. And it's up to us to bring them back. And it's also important that, I mean, for example, if I, as an Arab, when I learn about Nawal el-Saadawi or Huda Ashrawi, these were leading feminists from Egypt, or Zaha Hadid, Iraqi architect. If I know about them and they are part of my heritage, I will myself have more confidence in what I can do. If they did that, that is part of my heritage. And so there's a double process, I think, at least. One, these women, let's say these two Nepali women, when their accomplishments are really grasped by not only Nepali men, but especially Nepali women and children, they will themselves, I think, gain a greater confidence that from their culture they can achieve much. And then not only that why should Nepalis have to look towards Europe for models of leadership when we can find it in our own culture? The same with Arabs. Why should we look to Britain or France when we have our own? It matters. This is part of your own identity. And I remember an African American woman, we were part of a workshop, and she talked about how important it was. She said, when you know what your people have accomplished, that is part of what you accomplish and you can accomplish. And that's 2 points. And the third one is that, of course, these two women, what they accomplished is equal to so many others that we champion from other parts of the world. So it's up to us to put them into international history.
True. And do you find it's happening like that in Nepal or not? Like when you observe today's research scenario, if we are close to Nepal or Nepal study or South Asia study or Oriental study regarding these women leaders or heroes, do you find it's happening, or you are not much satisfied what's going on with it?
Sorry. It's happening. I think the novel by Neelam Niharika has done a great deal to again introduce Nepali citizenship to Yogmaya. And Shanta Shrestha, who works in Nepal, she is active with the United Nations, and I heard a paper by her where she's gathering information about Nepali women leaders, and she presents that in various forums. I mean, it is a slow process, and most of the work being done in Nepal interestingly, is being done by male scholars. And I don't know quite why um, young women and women scholars have not wanted to jump into this process. Fortunately, Niharika has, and that will, I think, make a great difference, and probably already has. Um, but then we have the two women who who had different strategies. Yogamaya had one strategy to awaken people, to champion them, to encourage them, and Durga Devi had another strategy, which was much more of a secular, modern strategy. I would call it more of a um, militant, but still personal. And we have to study those two strategies. I think any of us, if we think about who we want to follow, whether it's a political party or a person, those parties have different strategies to achieve a political goal, right? And we're attracted to one over another. And the same is true with these two women and to other women. You know, one may climb a mountain like Sherpa Pasang, and that may inspire Nepali women along that line. And so, you know, this is why I also am very eager for Durga Devi's history to be more widely known. Yogamaya is now established, I think, in Nepali history and in the imagination. Not that we should not continue, there's still much more to learn, but Durga Devi is a very different character with a different strategy. And I think we need to see an alternative kind of leadership to what Yogamaya proposed.
And let me take you back. It would be a bit interesting to know, like when you came in Nepal, uh, probably you might have met with some anthropologists then, and who were there, and what kind of research situation was here. Or you did everything of your own. You didn't get connected to any anthropologist in Nepal. What was exactly the situation that day and time when you came in Nepal?
First of all, I haven't mentioned that my work on these two women is all published in English. There's the new book called Yogamaya and Durga Devi, which is available on Amazon. Thanks to my friend Mr. Tuladar, we've posted it, we've published it through Amazon in the States, so it's readily available either in Kindle or hard copy in a very nice edition, or in Nepal, it was published by Manohar. So, oh no, not Manohar, Mandala. Sorry, Mandala Book Point. And then second, much of my writing on Nepal and elsewhere is now available. Again, thanks to my colleagues Tuladar and Toft, on my new website, which is barbaranimri.com. And that's all free, and my work is there. So people can find out many more details about these two women from my work, at least. And of course, much more is available. Again, the historical novel, Yogamaya. So going back to your question, it's such a difficult, it's a whole other topic. Do you really want to go that way?
No. I mean to say at that time whether there were female like anthropologists working there in Nepal or not, because it's a very slim chance that you met with any other one working in similar field. So I was curious how our society is moving forward.
Well, first of all, in those days, in the 70s, we didn't there were quite a few, maybe 6 anthropologists who were working in various areas of Nepal, and several of them were women. There's Hannah Rauber from Switzerland, who is just finishing her work, finally, after 50 years, publishing a book about the homely Kempa people. And Sherry Ortner, she was working in Solu just a few months before I arrived. And none of us met in Nepal because we went, to the village. We stayed there. There was no, why make this long trip back to Kathmandu? 3 weeks walk. And anyway, it just wasn't done. We lived without telephones and whatever, even without airplanes. So we stayed there. That was just the custom. That was the way we were trained. And the only time we met was at international conferences. The first one in London was the first Himalayan Studies Conference. And that's when I met the Sherry Ortner and probably, etc. So we didn't meet then. And I don't know what else to say. I mean, I can't start talking about conditions in 1970. I mean, when I went to Kadbari, my last visit to Nepal, I went up to Kadbari. I hadn't been for 12 years or so. And when I came back to Kathmandu, I said to Dipesh Neopane, I said, "Oh my God, it's changed so much. Couldn't believe it." He said, "Well, what do you expect?" He said, "Look at Kathmandu. How much Kathmandu has changed." He said, "Don't you realize, Kadbari would change just as much?" And so there you are. And what is, I think, maybe more significant is that I doubt, especially people I know, younger people in Nepal, people do not talk about the Rana period and the difficulties and the censorship and the discrimination and almost racism. Maybe I shouldn't call it that, but it was scary, and nobody would say any. There wasn't a word uttered about the administration or corruption or the Rana or the king. That, I think, is something we need to realize, the real transformation that democracy has brought starting in 1990, the demonstrations and the killings by the government, the way they put down any slight uprising, at the university or out in the hills. The troops were there, right there, without the way they also came in and up to the Iron River and arrested Yogamaya and her followers. I mean, the military were there. They didn't need telephones and planes. They were in total control, and it was very scary time, which again, that's why anthropologists were so furtive and so careful. And we just, came and did our PhD and went away. We didn't ask any questions about freedom of speech or political issues of any kind.
We had heroes. We have heroes. Maybe we'll have heroes, but has our society given that due respect to these female heroes? What is your finding?
You mean these two?
Not only two, many other, like even Parijat you met with, and many other female heroes. Or maybe we can focus into these female heroes, even these two female heroes. Our society, have you find them giving due respect to their work, their revolutionary image, or anything?
Well, this brings up another problem, that the championing of women by feminists in particular often is of the victim. Feminists are very victim oriented. They want to save other women, whether it's Afghanis or whether it's trafficked girls or whether it's rape victims. They're really into savior. That's a British colonial kind of mentality, which of course the Americans and the French and all the Europeans participate in. We go for the victim. I mean, as an Arab woman, I see this about myself, people's attitude towards me, or of course, people in the Middle East as well. The news highlight the victim. And this is where feminists think they have found a raison d'etre. We will go to save the Afghan women. We will go to save the trafficked women. We will go to save the raped women in the Congo and in Nepal. And this is very dangerous, very dangerous. And this is the tendency. And so we bypass the heroes. So that's a process that we are all engaged in.
Does it have to do with any particular society? Like maybe Nepalese forget faster, Americans keep on remembering it, Arabs don't give credit, or anything, any line of similarity or any line of differences we can mark in this thing, in forgetting our heroes, especially female heroes, female champions?
Well, from what I see, I think it's universal. I haven't done a lot of studies of this, but I think it's universal.
Then Nepali society is not much different than the world in discrediting our champions' achievement or anything.
Yes, but I think Nepal, if I may say, is too much oriented to the outside, very, very much. Whether it's going abroad for education, for work, for movies, technology, and while Nepalis are very, very successful internationally, the country itself may lose the talent and the energy that could be used, the intellectual and political energy that's needed to feel more confident. It's just my idea. People, this is very controversial. I'll be glad to hear other people's views.
Interesting. We are almost on halfway, maybe so many issues still to be covered. I would like to introduce Dr. Chemjong in here. Okay, and I forgot to say, Barbara has done PhD. She's Dr. Barbara. I need to mention this. And I want a few comments from Professor Chemjong in it, what we have discussed so far. Then I'll put forward some questions related to anthropology and things that are going on in Nepal and in relationship to female champions and so on. Professor Chemjong, welcome to the session.
Thank you, Jaduji. I would like to thank Nepal Post and Jaduji from Europe and Girish Pokhrelji from Virginia, USA. I should appreciate your initiative in terms of bringing us together in this space. I had not heard, I had not listened to or heard of Barbara speaking before. We had briefly talked over the phone when we started this MPhil PhD course in anthropology sometime in July, August. So I just want to highlight some of the points that why anthropology, when we were developing anthropology course syllabus for the PhD level at TU, why we decided to include Barbara's book for the class Anthropology, Gender Relations, and Feminism class for our students. Let me mention here that I can see many of my students from the PhD class in this space, but Barbara and I will fix a meeting for the class on the same topic in near future, and you guys will have my class students will have a class on the same topic over Zoom from Barbara, and on that day you will have the chance to both listen to and both watch Barbara's talk. And also, thank you, Barbara, for the context you undertook your research for your PhD, and you have said lots of things in which one of the things I would very appreciate the point you raised in it is how you became interested on the topic that was marginalized until that point. That was marginalized topic not on up to that moment, but it is still marginalized issue. So, but we had, when I was talking with Girishji before, we had in a way agreed that I would speak in Nepali and Barbara would speak in English, so that both the listeners who would be comfortable in listening to English or who would be comfortable in Nepali would have chance to have the communication with both of us. So maybe I would like to switch to Nepali now. बार्बराजीलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु, नेपाली पोस्टलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु, जादुजी र गिरीशजी, दोज तपाईहरुले हामीलाई सँगै यहाँनिर ल्याएर धेरै राम्रो गर्नुभएको छ भन्छु म, फ्रम द पोइन्ट अफ भ्यू अफ एन्थ्रोपोलोजी एज वेल। अनि हाम्रो लागि पनि बार्बराजीले पनि आफ्नो कुराहरू राख्ने मौका पाउनुभयो, यसलाई एउटा सन्दर्भमा राख्नुभयो। मैले किन यो राखेँ र हामीले किन राखेका छौं भन्ने कुराको अलिकति सन्दर्भमा कोट्याउन चाहन्छु। हामी एन्थ्रोपोलोजीको मास्टर्स लेभलको कोर्समा पनि यो भनौं न वास्तवमा हिस्ट्री अफ एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमा अथवा हिस्ट्री एन्ड एन्थ्रोपोलोजीको क्लासमा पनि र यो हामीले राखिराखेको, मेरो कलिगलाई मैले यहाँ देख्दैछु, डाक्टर जनक राई हुनुहुन्छ यहाँनिर, उहाँले पनि पहिला यो हिस्ट्री एन्ड एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमा यो बार्बराजीको एयर टु साइलेन्ट सङको किताब, त्यो पुरानो चाहिँ जुन छ 2001 मा सिनासले पब्लिस गरेको, त्यो राखिरहनु भएको थियो, त्यो हामीले डिस्कस गरिराखेका थियौं। सो यसैभित्र मैले के जोड्न चाहन्छु भने हामी एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमा चाहिँ सीमान्तकृत डाइभर्सिटी अफ भोइसेस अनि यो मल्टिप्लिसिटी अफ भोइसेस, यो आवाजको विविधता, आन्दोलनको विविधता, समाज र संस्कृतिको विविधता, यो कुराहरूलाई हामी एक्नोलेज मात्रै गर्दैनौं कि यसलाई हामी सिलेबसहरु बनाएर हामी यो पढ्न पढाउन छलफल गर्न चाहन्छौं। त्यसैले मलाई यो कुरामा गर्व लाग्छ, मलाई मात्रै हैन, on behalf of my colleagues, on behalf of my department as well, I feel proud of having been able to include in our course syllabus those marginalized issues, different movements, and specifically यो movement, यो issue भनेको त नेपाली राजनीतिले, नेपाली समाजले, नेपाली सोशल मुभमेन्ट्सहरुले, अझ त्यसमा पनि हामी हाम्रो नारीवादी आन्दोलनले समेत, महिलावादी आन्दोलनले समेत, त्यो आन्दोलन जो नेपाली राजनीतिको एउटा अभिन्न अंग हो, नेपाली महिलावादी र नेपाली नारीवादी आन्दोलनका अभियन्ताहरूले समेत पनि करिब करिब यो आफ्नो आन्दोलनको मूल प्रवाहमा ल्याउन नसकेको र भरसक नचिनेको र हुनसक्छ थाहा पनि नपाएको विषयवस्तुमा बार्बराजीले लेख्नुभएको पुस्तकलाई हामीले समावेश गरेर हामी पढिराखेका थियौँ। यो सन्दर्भमा हामी कसरी एउटा सीमान्तकृत टपिकहरूलाई संलग्न गर्न सक्छौँ र हामी त्यो देख्न सक्छौँ भन्ने कुरामा म आफै पनि यो it's not about self-promotion, it's not appreciation, but that is what anthropology does and has been doing, and our department have been doing in this respect. भन्ने कुरामा चाहिँ अलिकति आफैलाई पनि गर्व लाग्छ, मेरो कलिग्सहरूलाई पनि गर्व लाग्छ होला जस्तो लाग्छ, मेरो डिपार्टमेन्ट पनि त्यो कुरामा खुसी छ. So when we were developing this course on anthropology, gender relations and feminism in Nepal's context, यो कुरा चाहिँ एकदम पहिलो प्राथमिकतामा राख्नु पर्छ भनेर हामीले बार्बराजीको यो योगमाया पुस्तकलाई अनि फेरि भर्खरै 2 वर्ष अगाडि मात्रै अमृता लम्सालजीले हजुरआमाका कथा भनेर एउटा नयाँ निकाल्नु भयो अनि नेपाली भाषाबाट हामीले त्यो छान्यौं र अंग्रेजी भाषाबाट बार्बराजीको छान्यौं. अनि त्यति मात्रै होइन, हामीले अरु पनि राखेका छौं. मेरो आफ्नै प्रोफेसर क्याथरिन मार्चको तमाम वुमेनहरुको कथा गीत, त्यो इफ इच कम्स हाफवे भन्ने एथनोग्राफी छ, त्यो पनि हामीले राखेका छौं. शेरा तमाङको पनि राखेका छौं, क्याथरिन र्याङ्किनको पनि राखेका छौं. अब यसरी तर यति थुप्रै सामग्रीहरु राख्दै पनि नेपालकै केस स्टडीहरुबाट थुप्रै सामग्री राख्दै पनि योगमाया stands apart and stands very unique in terms of the topic, in terms of the feminist movement for the women's rights, movement against the patriarchy, movement against the domination of women by the patriarchal society. Barbara's book, or Yogmaya's case, not only sets itself apart from the other movements, हामीले संसारमै हेर्दाखेरि पनि संसारमा कहाँ त्यस्तो खालको युनिक र एब्सोल्युटली एम्ब्लेमेटिक एक्जाम्पल्सहरु होला कि 6 दर्जन भन्दा बढी महिलाहरु, पुरुषहरु सबै मिलेर, आन्दोलनकर्मीहरु मिलेर, they sacrificed their lives in the Arun River. नेपालीमा जल समाधि भन्छ. They had actually tried before. अग्निदाह एउटा ठूलो यज्ञ गरेर त्यसभित्र अग्निमा आत्मदाह गर्ने उहाँहरुको एउटा त्यस्तो खालको थियो, त्यो जंगली विद्रोह गर्ने. How many cases would you see over the world in these kind of rebellious cases in which more than 5 dozen people, 65, 64 भन्छ, त्यत्रो महिलाहरुले they laid their lives for the sake of democracy, not, I wouldn't say for the sake of democracy, but for the sake of women's movement, women's rights, so as to liberate themselves from the patriarchal domination and exploitation. So, तर अलिकति अचम्मको कुरा के छ भने, न त नेपालमा लोकतन्त्रको प्रजातन्त्रको आन्दोलनको इतिहासमा नै योगमाया न्यौपाने, दुर्गादेवी घिमिरेहरू जस्तोको त्यो योगदानलाई, त्यो सांगठनिक क्षमतालाई, त्यो 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 होल आन्दोलनलाई एक्नोलेज गरेको देखिन्छ अहिलेसम्म। न त नेपालमा सामाजिक आन्दोलनको इतिहासले नै एक्नोलेज गरेको देखिन्छ। So we should be thankful to Dr. Barbara Nimre Aziz for having brought in this issue on the forefront, and the political forefront, and the social science forefront. So यो एउटा युनिक केस हो र हामीले यो केसलाई हाइलाइट गर्नुपर्छ भनेर अगाडि ल्याएको। अङ्ग्रेजीमा थियो पहिला, त्यसैले यो धेरैको रिडरसिप भित्र थिएन। मैले अहिले नेपालीमा कुरा गर्नको अर्थ के पनि हो भने नीलम कार्की निहारिकाजी हुनुहुन्छ। थ्याङ्क यू नीलमजी फर visiting us at my department before about 5-6 weeks earlier. You were at my department. अनि तपाईको जति बेला योगमाया पुस्तक निस्क्यो त्यो लन्च भएको दिन, यो टुरिज्म बोर्डमा लन्च भएको दिन मलाई पनि इन्भाइट गर्नुभएको थियो तपाईको प्रकाशक मणि दाहालजीले, अनि मणिजीले, अनि म पनि त्यहाँ म काठमाडौँभन्दा बाहिर थिएँ। यो पर्सनल कुरा हो, तैपनि मैले सेयर गर्न चाहन्छु। I came to that book launching ceremony. I bought it and I brought it home. अनि मलाई यस्तो यो विषयले तान्यो कि अङ्ग्रेजीमा बाबराजीको पुस्तक मात्रै हेरेकोमा तपाईले नेपालीमा त्यो होल 504 पेज छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। It's just more than 500 pages you have written. एउटा मोटो नोभल भए पनि मैले त्यसलाई त्यही दिनबाट हेरेर भोलिपल्ट पढिसकेर मैले त्यसको पनि रिभ्यू पनि लेखेँ। So I found it really fascinating, not only in terms of the story, but in terms of the topic that was focused on Nepal's feminist movement. हाम्रो डिपार्टमेन्टमा, हाम्रो क्लासहरुमा, हाम्रो मास्टर्स लेभलको, अन्डरग्रेड लेभलको अथवा ग्रेजुएट लेभलको कोर्सेसहरुमा we would love to bring in the cases from all around the world. हामी सिमोन द बिभियरको कुराहरु गर्छौं। अघि बारबराले धेरै प्रसंगहरु निकाल्नु भयो, उहाँहरुलाई हामी यहाँनिर पढाउँछौं। तर धेरै जसो केसहरुमा हामी नेपाल भित्रको केसहरु चाहिँ हाम्रो यो घर छेउको मन्दिर हेला, घर छेउको देउता हेला भनेको जस्तो हामीले राख्दैनौं। सो तर हामीले राख्न सक्यौं, राखेछौं। अहिले पढि पनि राख्नु भएको छ। हाम्रो विद्यार्थीहरु पनि यहाँ पनि हुनुहुन्छ। भोलिपर्सि हामी बाबराजीको एउटा प्रोग्राम पनि अर्गनाइज गर्छौं इन नियर फ्युचर। धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद छ।
प्रोफेसर चेम्जोङलाई मैले यहाँ रोकेर एउटा प्रश्न थप्न मन लाग्यो। अब बारबरा जस्ता मान्छेहरुले आएर रिसर्च गरेर हामीलाई चिनाइदिराख्नु भएको छ, हाम्रा नारी हिरोहरु भनौं, नारी नायकहरु। अहिले हामीसित त डिपार्टमेन्ट छ, पढाइ भइरहेछ, यस्ता शोधहरु कतिको भइरहेछन्। अहिले कस्ता स्कलरहरुले काम गरिराख्नु भएको छ, त्यसमा नारीहरुको उपस्थिति कस्तो छ, के भइरहेछ अहिले हाम्रो एन्थ्रोपोलोजिकल स्टडीको समाज कसरी अगाडि बढिरहेछ?
अब अहिले दुईटा यो एक ढंगले बाइफोर्केटेड छ भनेर भन्छु म जादुजी तपाईलाई, इन द सेन्स दैट हाम्रो सोशल साइन्सेसहरु एन्थ्रोपोलोजी एक्सेप्सन होइन, अरु पनि तपाई इकोनोमिक्स भन्नुस्, तपाई सोशियोलोजी भन्नुस्, पोलिटिकल साइन्स भन्नुस्, हिस्ट्री भन्नुस्, अरु विषयले के गरिरहेछ त्यति साह्रो मलाई थाहा छैन। तर I can speak a little bit more about sociology and anthropology. हामी पनि एक त यो कम्युनिटी डेभलपमेन्ट एप्रोचबाट एकदमै ओभरवेल्मिङली गाइडेड पनि छौं। अब यो इस्यु भनेको हामीले प्योर सोशल साइन्समा, बेसिक एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमा गर्नुपर्ने कुरा। बारबराजीको काम भनेको एकदम फन्डामेन्टल बेसिक एन्थ्रोपोलोजी भित्र त्यसमा पनि फेमिनिजम फोकस्ड छ। मैले इमानदारीपूर्वक भन्नु पर्दाखेरि नेपाल राज्य अथवा अथवा नेपाली गभर्नमेन्ट चाहिँ युरोपमा अथवा नर्थ अमेरिकामा अथवा हुनसक्छ अफ्रिकामा जतिको पनि अथवा साउथ अमेरिकामा जतिको पनि अथवा हाम्रो साउथ एसियामा पनि इन्डिया जतिको पनि रिसोर्सलाई चाहिँ वास्तवमा सोसियल साइन्स रिसर्चमा लाउनुपर्छ, यो विद्यार्थीहरूलाई यसरी मद्दत गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने पक्षमा छैन। तपाईँ कतिपय साथीहरू युरोपमा हुनुहुन्छ, कतिपय साथीहरू युएसमा हुनुहुन्छ। हामी आफै पनि फर्चुनेटली I did my master's from Europe. I did my PhD from North America, one of the best universities in the world. तर त्यहाँ भनेको तपाईँ graduate level को whole courses for 5 years, for 6 years, for 7 years, for 8 years, for 9 years तपाईलाई सपोर्ट गर्ने हो फेलोशिपले, युनिभर्सिटीले अथवा युनिभर्सिटीलाई पनि सपोर्ट गर्ने संस्थाहरूले, सोशल साइन्स रिसर्च काउन्सिलहरूले। हाम्रोमा के छ, तपाईले पीएचडी गर्नुहुन्छ भने थीसिस लेख्नको लागि म 50,000 दिन्छु भनेर कहिले व्यक्तिहरू आउँछ, कहिले संस्था आउँछ। सो अनि कहाँ हुन्छ त अलिकति रिसोर्स भन्दाखेरि डेभलपमेन्ट फिल्डमा हुन्छ। अनि डेभलपमेन्ट फिल्डमा जाने बित्तिकै यहाँ तपाईँ हामीलाई थाहा छ, who pays the piper calls the tune। जसले अलिकति लगानी गर्छ उसले आफ्नो खालको अब्जेक्टिभ्सहरू, रिसर्च क्वेसन्सहरू उसले सेट गरेर दिन्छ। त्यसले गर्दा पनि हामी बेसिक सोशल साइन्स गर्ने कुराबाट अलिकति बाध्यकारी रूपमा चाहिँ अलिकति विमुख हुन्छौँ, भइराखेको स्थिति छ। फेरि पनि हाम्रो इन्डिभिजुअल क्यापासिटीहरू बढिराखेको छ भन्छु म। More individuals have been now capable of undertaking the PhD research projects on their own interest, and in many senses, in many cases, even individual families are now capable of funding their own projects। अब त्यो पनि छ। त्यसरी गर्दाखेरि आफ्नो इन्ट्रेस्टमा गर्न सक्छ, गर्दाखेरि त यसरी ल्याउनु पर्ने भयो। अहिले नै पनि भनौँ न ल, अहिले यस्तो खालको मुभमेन्टहरूमा यो जहाँ ओझेलमा परेको कुराहरूमा, यस्तो एक्सप्लोर गर्ने कुराहरूमा युरोप र युएसए का युनिभर्सिटीहरू, त्यसमा पनि खासमा I would like to appreciate very much about the US universities। विद्यार्थीहरूलाई फन्डिङ गर्ने कुरा, उनीहरूको रिसर्च इन्ट्रेस्टमा फन्डिङ गर्ने कुरामा एकदम राम्रो छ जस्तो लाग्छ। हामी इन्टरनेसनल स्टुडेन्ट्सले पनि केही अब पाउँछौँ। अब भनौँ न इङ्ल्यान्डको युनिभर्सिटीहरूमा त्यति साह्रो पाउन सकिन्छ जस्तो लाग्दैन, तर इन्डाउमेन्ट सिस्टममा छ युएस युनिभर्सिटीहरू। हाम्रोमा पनि त्यो खालको इन्डाउमेन्ट सिस्टमहरू भइदिएको भए, मैले बार बार भन्छु, हामी हुने खाने मन हुनेले, धन हुनेले हिजो शिवालयहरू खोल्नमा इन्डाउमेन्ट गर्यो, गुठीहरू बनायो। अब शिक्षालयहरू खोल्नमा र मान्छेहरूलाई शिक्षा दिने कुरामा इन्डाउमेन्ट गरिदिए हुन्थ्यो, फन्डिङहरू त्यसरी गरिदिए हुन्थ्यो। त अहिले पनि हामी यतापट्टि यसरी ट्रान्सफर हुन सकेको छैन हाम्रो माइन्डसेट। तर अलिकति केही अर्थमा भइराखेको छ भन्ठान्छु। अहिले नै हामी यही कुराहरू गरिरहँदा पनि हाम्रो मेरो स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू एन्थ्रोपोलोजीको अहिले जो ग्रेजुएट स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू हुनुहुन्छ, पिएचडीकोमा फिल्ड रिसर्च गर्न जाने उहाँहरू 1-2 वर्षमा तयार हुनुहुन्छ। धेरै साथीहरूसँग, धेरै साथीभाइहरूसँग इन्डिभिजुअली कुरा गर्दाखेरि पनि नाउ अब many of them have the interest on doing research on focusing on these feminist issues and the movements।
अनि सरको अब्जर्भेसनमा चाहिँ मैले त्यही प्रश्न अघि बारबरालाई जे क्वेसन सोधेको थिएँ त्यही प्रश्नको सोध्छु। हाम्रा यी नायकहरू किन पछि पारिन्छन्, बिर्सिन्छन्? यो हाम्रो समाजको चरित्रसित मिल्दो कुरा हो अथवा के कारण रहेछ? सरको पढाइले, खोजाइले के कन्क्लुजनमा पुर्याउँछ? किन यिनीहरू हराउँदै जान्छन्, विस्मृतिमै जान्छन्?
अब यहाँ भन्नै पर्ने हुन्छ, नेपाली स्कलरसिप खास गरेर सोशल साइन्सेसहरूमा हाम्रो यो स्कलरसिपको फाउन्डेसन एकदमै विक छ। फन्डिङको हिसाबले पनि एकदमै कमजोर छ, अनि विषयवस्तु कसरी छनौट गर्ने भन्ने हिसाबले पनि एकदमै कमजोर छौँ हामी। अहिले भन्नै पर्ने हुन्छ शिक्षा भनेको के हो र एजुकेसन भनेको के हो र नलेज भनेको के हो। अनि नलेज प्रोडक्सन र डिसेमिनेसन र डिस्कसन, अझ त्यसमा पनि क्रिटिकल नलेज को प्रोडक्सन कसरी हुन्छ भन्ने सन्दर्भमा हाम्रो स्कलरसिपले केही बुझ्ने तहमै पुगेको छैन जस्तो लाग्छ। तपाईले अनि अहिलेसम्म भएको रिसर्च र अहिलेसम्म भएको नलेजको कन्टेक्स्टलाई क्रिटिक गरेर नयाँ नलेजहरू आउने हो। हामी युरोपको ट्रेडिसन हेर्यो भने हामीले प्लेटो अरस्तुसम्म त पुग्नु पर्दैन, तर तपाईले 15th सेन्चुरी अनवर्ड्स हेर्नुभयो भने पनि हामी थोमस हब्स, जन लक, मान्टेस्क्यू, रुसो, इमानुएल कान्ट, उनीहरूभन्दा पछिको उनीहरू बीचकै इन्टरेक्सन्सहरू र उनीहरूभन्दा पछिको आउँदै हेगेल, कार्ल मार्क्स, दुर्खाइम, एमिल दुर्खाइम, मैक्स वेबर, अनि यो फ्रेडरिक नीत्शे, अब अहिले पछिल्लो कालमा आउँदा उनीहरूलाई हेर्दै आयो भने तपाईँ आफ्नो भन्दा अघिल्लो पुस्तालाई भेहेमेन्टली क्रिटिक गरेर हेगेलले भनेको जस्तो कुन थिसिस चाहिँ अहिले डोमिनेन्ट छ त्यसको काउन्टर थिसिस त्यसमाथि क्रिटिक गरेर डिस्कसन गरेर त्यसलाई एक लेभलमा डिनाई गरेर अनि त्यो छलफल र त्यो डिबेटहरुबाट अर्को सिन्थेसिस निस्किँदै जाँदाखेरि त्यो सिन्थेसिस चाहिँ फेरि न्यू थिसिस हुन्छ। हामी यो बडा स्कलरली र एकाडेमिक इन्भाइरोमेन्ट भित्र युरोपको त्यो स्कलरशिप चाहिँ त्यसरी डेभलप भएर आएको र इभल्भ भएर आएको देख्छौं। नेपाली मात्रै हैन कि साउथ एशियन स्कलरशिप पनि यो लेभलको ओपन माइन्डेड क्रिटिसिजम भित्र यो क्रिटिकल हुनुपर्छ र क्रिटिक हुनुपर्छ भन्ने कुरालाई एक्सेप्ट गर्न नै सिकेको छैन। त्यसो हुँदा फेरि एउटा कुरा त त्यो, अर्को कुरो एकदमै एब्सोल्युट प्याट्रियार्की का कारणले पनि महिलाको यो आन्दोलनलाई एकदमै ओझेलमा पार्यो। हामी देख्छौं महिलाहरूको नेपाली राजनीतिमा महिलाको भूमिका भनेर कहिलेकाहीँ अहिले मैले आई डोन्ट वान्ट टु अन्डरमाइन हियर, तर एक्जाम्पलहरू जादुजी तपाईले कस्तो पाउनुहुन्छ भने त्यो भूमिगत राजनीतिको बेलामा चिठी ओसार पसार गरेको पत्रहरू अनि केही खाजा पानी बनाइदिएको त्यो कुराहरूलाई मात्रै बढी हाइलाइट गरेर नेपाली राजनीतिमा महिलाहरूको भूमिका भनेर हिजो राणा कालमा त त्यस्तो कुराहरूलाई मात्रै गरेको छ। अनि योगमाया न्यौपानेको कन्ट्रिब्युसन भनेको त कुनै पनि पुरुषहरूले कति नै ठुलो संगठित रूपमा गरेको भन्दा महान छ वास्तवमा। अनि आफ्नो पुरुषहरूको कन्ट्रिब्युसन चाहिँ र पुरुषहरूको साङ्गठनिक क्षमता भन्दा कताउ बलियो, सङ्घर्षशील र विद्रोहात्मक भएको भएर पनि त्यो जान पनि ओझेलमा पारिएको होला भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। अर्को कुरा, महिलाले गरेको एक्टिभिजम र महिलाले गर्ने आन्दोलनहरूलाई जसरी हामीले महिलाहरूको एक्टिभिटिजहरूलाई इकोनोमिकली प्रोडक्टिभ एक्टिभिटी नमान्ने खालको पितृसत्तात्मक समाज छ, त्यसरी नै त्यो राजनीतिक रूप तहमा पनि महिलाले गरेको आन्दोलनलाई राजनीतिक हो भनेर स्वीकार नगर्ने खालको हामीभित्र एउटा डोक छ, हामीभित्र एउटा ह्याबिटस, त्यो खालको एउटा नेचुरलाइज्ड अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ भएको कारणले पनि यो चाहिँ यसरी ओझेलमा परेको अथवा हिजोका जुन हिरोजहरू छ, जस्तो पुरुष हिरोजहरूलाई त एक्सकाभेट गरेकै त्यो उत्खनन गरेकै छ, निकाल्न खोजेकै छ नि त सकेसम्म। तर महिला हिरोजहरूलाई भनौँ न एक ढङ्गले, अब यसमा डेलिबरेट एफोर्ट मैले भन्दैन, तर त्यो यो विषय चाहिँ नउठाए पनि हुन्छ। महिलाको आन्दोलन के आन्दोलन भन्ने खालको अहिले पनि त्यो खालको मेन्टालिटी त विद्यमान छ नि त। त्यसैले मैले 3वटा पोइन्टहरू यहाँ समक्ष राखे जस्तो लाग्छ। एक त हाम्रो स्कलरसिप कसरी एउटा क्रिटिकल मेथडबाट अगाडि बढेर आउनु पर्ने हो भन्ने पनि छैन। यहाँकै कार्यक्रममा अस्ति नै नयनराज पाण्डेजीले उठाउनु भयो, हामी बढी नै अतीतमुखी छौँ। हामी अतीतमुखी, अतीतको कुरा मनपर्छ हामीलाई। युरोप अमेरिकाले बनाएको क्षेप्यास्त्रहरूको कुरा गर्यो भने हाम्रो पौराणिक कालमै यस्तोहरू थियो भनेर हामी खुसी हुन्छौँ कि त्यो त कल्पना मात्रै थियो त, कथामा दन्ते कथा मात्रै थियो त। अहिले त सक्या हो र, पेन्सिल बनाउन सकेका छैन, के क्षेप्यास्त्र बनाउँछ। सो अनि आज पनि हामी आधुनिकताका लागि र आधुनिक राजनीतिका लागि, आधुनिक स्कलरसिपका लागि, जो चाहिँ वास्तवमा क्रिटिसिजमबाट मात्रै त्यो सम्भव छ, प्रश्नहरू गरेर मात्रै सम्भव छ, त्यो गर्ने तहमा हाम्रो शास्त्र नै पुगिराखेको छैन। अब फिजिकल साइन्सेसहरू केही हदसम्म भनौँ न इन्जिनियरिङ, फिजिक्स, केमिस्ट्री, अब यिनीहरू चाहिँ एक ढङ्गले हामी बढी पनि राखेका छ भनेर भन्छौँ। सोसल साइन्सेस पनि नबढेको त होइन, तर अब विश्व स्केलमै, विश्व परिवेशमै सोसल साइन्सेसहरू तपाईँले युएसमा पनि हेर्नुभयो भने अहिले सोसल साइन्सेसमा फन्डिङ एकदमै घटाएको छ। युरोपमा पनि त्यो केसहरू होला, यहाँहरू हुनुहुन्छ। सो हामी पोलिटिकल इकोनोमिक पोइन्ट अफ भ्यूबाट पनि सोसल साइन्सेसहरूलाई बिस्तारै पाखा लाउने कुराहरू भइरहेछ। हामी यहाँनिर केही गर्छु भन्यो भने पनि गर्ने खालको त्यो फन्डिङ, त्यो सपोर्ट, त्यो मेकानिजमहरू हाम्रो गभर्मेन्टले पनि त्यसरी डेभलप गर्न सकिराखेको छैन। अब नेपालमा त एउटा दर्दनाक स्थिति नै छ भन्छु म।
अर्को एकदम इम्पोर्टेन्ट प्रश्न चाहिँ मलाई लागेको चाहिँ हाम्रो फिमेलहरूलाई, नारीहरूलाई कतिको अवसर छ त एकाडेमियामै पनि काम गर्नलाई? अरू क्षेत्रलाई त छोडिदिउँ, अरू सबै त विस्मृतिको रोगबाट शिकार होलान्। हाम्रो एकाडेमिया अहिले पनि आधाभन्दा बढी, अझ बढी चाहिँ पुरुषहरूको आधिपत्य छ। त्यहाँ बसेका पुरुषहरूमा यो नारीहरूलाई अथवा नारी आन्दोलनलाई दिनुपर्ने क्रेडिट, नारी च्याम्पियन्सहरूलाई दिनुपर्ने क्रेडिट, अथवा नयाँ च्याम्पियन नारीहरू बनाउने हिसाबले हाम्रो एकाडेमिया कसरी वर्क गरिरहेछ कि छैन, कि अब यो कुरामा मात्रै छ कि के छ, स्थिति के छ?
नेपालमा अहिले भन्नु पर्दाखेरि त अब मैले वातावरण छ भन्छु। हाम्रो अब जस्तो म त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालयसँग सम्बन्धित भएको हुनाले मैले भन्छु, यहाँको स्टाफको तपाईँले रेसियो हेर्नुभयो भने अहिले करिब 50-50 नै हो स्टाफको। त्यसभित्र कति विद्यार्थी नेताहरूको आफ्ना मान्छे छन् ह्यान त्यान यस्ता उस्ता कुराहरूलाई छोडिदिउँ, कसरी राख्छ, कसरी रिक्रुटमेन्ट गर्छ, कसरी त्यो आन्तरिक कुराहरूलाई छोडिदिउँ, तर पनि इफ यु look at the ratio of both female and male employees at Tribhuvan University, it is almost half and half. त्यो अलिकति तलको तहमा त्यस्तो भइराखेको छ। अब यो बिस्तारै माथि त आउने नै हो। अर्को कुरा गभर्नमेन्टको पोलिसी, अफर्मेटिभ एक्सन, सोशल इन्क्लुजन, यो कुराहरूले गर्दा पनि द्याट हेज टु बी एडोप्टेड एन्ड फलोड बाई द त्रिभुवन युनिभर्सिटी एज वेल। तपाईँ अहिले भनौँ न 4 जना प्रोफेसरको ओपनिङ खुल्यो भने, ओपनिङ छ भने 2 जना महिला हुनुपर्छ, द्याट इज फर स्योर। हगि त्यसो हुँदा पोलिसी वाइज सपोर्ट गरिराखेको छ भन्छु म चाहिँ। त्यो किनभने पोलिसीमा त्यो छ भएपछि हुन्छ नै। अब अहिले भर्खरै एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमा अब मुद्दा लागेको छ, तपाईलाई थाहा छँदैछ यहाँ कस्तो छ के छ भन्ने कुरा। मलाई पनि इम्प्लिकेट गर्यो, whereas I had nothing to do with all these processes. Departments यो पोइन्टमा म जान्न, तर हाम्रो 3 जना एन्थ्रोपोलोजिस्टहरू अहिले नियुक्ति लिनु पाउनु भएको छैन, लेक्चररहरू पास हुनु भएको छ। तर म पास हुनुपर्ने भनेर कसैले मुद्दा लगाएको हुनाले त्यो अहिले त्यतिकै विथहोल्ड भएर बसेको छ, कोर्टमा गएको छ। जस्तो अब 3 जनामा 1 जना महिला, 2 जना पुरुष पास हुनु भएको छ भनौँ न। अनि तर यहाँ कस्तो छ भने त्रिभुवन युनिभर्सिटीको अथवा हाम्रो एकाडेमिया भित्रको तपाईको प्रोफेसरशिप भित्रको कस्तो छ त पेमेन्ट सिस्टमहरू नेपालमा हेर्दाखेरि? मैले अलिकति नकारात्मक सुन्दा तपाईलाई नकारात्मक लाग्ला, कतिले युरोप अमेरिकामा पढाएर बस्नु भएको पनि होला। अहिले मैले युरोप पढ्दाखेरि पनि युएसए पढ्दाखेरि पनि इन्टरनली यसरी बुझ्दाखेरि, अनौपचारिक रूपमा इन्फर्मल्ली बुझ्दाखेरि पनि स्टाफ र एकाडेमिक्स को सुविधा, उनीहरूको स्यालेरी कहिले पनि एउटै देखेन, कहीँ पनि छैन संसारमा, इन्डियामा पनि छैन। नेपाल मात्रै यस्तो देश हो त्यहाँ जहाँ युनिभर्सिटी सिस्टममा स्टाफ र एकाडेमिकको बराबर हुन्छ स्यालेरी। So there is no financial incentive for the academic people to be involved, to remain stick to the university teaching. त्यसैले हाम्रो एन्थ्रोपोलोजीमै हेर्यो भने पनि कति राम्रो कति कम्पिटेन्ट प्रोडक्टहरु विद्यार्थीहरु हुनुहुन्छ। तर अब कोही भनौँ न वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कमा जानुहुन्छ, कोही युएनडिपीमा जानुहुन्छ। किन यहाँ त अब तपाईको प्राज्ञिकताले मात्रै त अगाइन्न, हावाले त अगाइन्न, हावाले त जिन्दगी चल्दैन।
इन्ट्रेस्टिङ।
अनि यो कुरा पनि मलाई लाग्छ। So even our products, many of our products are not that much interested and fascinated, motivated to be in the teaching. एउटा त कुरा त्यो होला। तर युनिभर्सिटीले चाहिँ एउटा पोलिसी वाइज जस्तो 50-50 हायरिङ गर्नु पर्छ भन्ने पोलिसी हुनु भनेको चाहिँ आई थिंक दैट इज भेरी पोजिटिभ अबाउट इट।
थ्यांक यू प्रोफेसर चेम्जोङ। म अहिले यहाँलाई रोके। सपना जी माथि आउनु भएको छ, उहाँसित केही प्रश्न छन्, त्यो प्रश्न सुनौ अनि यो कन्भर्सेसनलाई अगाडि जोड्दै लगाउँला। ओभर टु यू सपना।
Thank you, Jaduji. Hi, Namaste, Barbara, and Namaste, Dambarji. Very interesting discussion happening. I have a few questions on the basis of what Barbara said earlier and what Dambarji said earlier, and I wanted to dig slightly deeper into the topic of feminism and gender representation in women's society and how you see it. The first question, perhaps slightly kind of takes us back to history. If we look at the Western literature and Hindu scripts, women are actually portrayed for power, for strength, for their capacity, and for their quality in our Hindu scripts, like, for example, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and so on, Durga, and so on. Whereas if you go back to, and even further down the line, women are still portrayed as for their strength. Whereas if you look at Western script or literature, we can see that Cleopatra and Helen of Troy and so on, despite their great qualities in other fields, they're highly sexualized. So how has the narration in Nepali context or in Asian cultural context changed from women portrayed as, very much strong for their all capacities to this now that we don't see them, they're invisible as contributor to the society? Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Sapana. Nice to talk to you again. Well, I guess that based on also what I had said earlier, that is the process of colonialization, where the colonizing society has to maintain its dominance, and through its academy, which is a major tool of colonialization, it's not just military and it's not just economic. It is very, very important culture as a cultural tool. The Western scientists redefine the culture in terms that they maintain their dominance. And a way to do this is to reduce, I guess you could say, or redefine what a woman in that society is and which women are worthy of Western attention. A lot of by early feminism, I mean the 70s, 80s, when they became political and wanted to show the universal issues of women, they concentrated on the biological and sexual and family aspects of women. And so you had anthropologists included studying Nepali sexuality or gender disparities, gender relations, women's cooking, home-oriented work. And that has happened all over the world. Western feminists, again, they took on the patriarchal role, in fact. And now there's a whole new area of study called, It's anti-colonialist feminism, mainly led by non-Western, I think, feminists who are saying enough of this, even though women feminists claimed authority over all women of the world. They adopted this patriarchal attitude and mode, and there is this movement now against what they call a white supremacist ideals of even feminists. I'll just leave it there and hear what you have to say.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah, there's a huge discussion going around white feminism, isn't it? And hence the discussion about outsider and insider. And you kind of mentioned about the non-Western feminist movement happening as well. Just building on what you've said, and I recall that you mentioning about feminism and representation of women, and you talked about that feminism rarely does mainstream feminism center the conversation on issues that concerns the most community level women, the real women, let's say. Instead, that it most often represents the women, those who come from privileged background, and and you also mentioned about those who want to be identified as a saviors rather than the one who have lived experiences. So my question to you is that how can academia contribute in changing that practice and changing that narration now? And I asked the same question to Dambarji after yourself, is that how can academia now contribute to changing that narration of the superior one, or the one privileged one ruling the discussion of feminism and gender inclusion?
Well, one way is to leave it, to leave the academy and to go into other fields, or to use academic studies to develop non-development, because the whole development model is a Western imperialist model. I am not a big, anti-colonialist person. I don't write anti-colonialist stuff, but I understand it, I think, having been entrapped by it. And we have alternatives, and those of us who may engage in this sort of raw anthropology, raw empirical studies, as I did, called ethnography, we can hope that our work is good enough to be taken up by people like Niharika and Parizad. Unfortunately, Parizad did not live to write about Yogmaya herself, and I wonder if she may have written, if she had lived longer, written a novel. But anyway, we have Niharika, who very much used ethnography. And I wanted to mention another thing. Early on, although he was British and he was an anthropologist, he said, I think it was Evans Pritchard, quite eminent in the last century, he said, anthropology is history, or it is nothing at all. And the fact that so many of us, for example, who worked in Nepal, our work is history now. The people, the life we described is history. It is of a period of Nepali history that is so changed that it is hardly of value except as history, which is very important. It's very important. And as far as changing the academic, I'm working as a journalist now. For the last 40 years, I have worked as a journalist, and I'm very happy doing this. I have learned to write English, which I didn't learn as an anthropologist, and this goes to the academy. I can't read most anthropological writing today. I just can't read it. And I pity students who have to labor through this jargon. I mean, it is a culture in itself, the academy. Not just anthropology, all fields. And it is a way of obfuscating material so that you have to concentrate on nothing but your field in order to comprehend it. I'm talking about English only. my God, it's so laborious. As I say, I feel pity for the students. And I realized one of the pioneers of American anthropology was, what's her name, a woman, Margaret Mead. And if you read her work now, you realize she's a brilliant writer. Forget about her science. She's a very, very good writer. And perhaps a few other anthropologists who have whose work has entered the popular field. It's not because of their science; it's because of their writing. So I think that points to another area where the academy can change. I don't know how. Even in America, I have searched for departments that include both anthropology and journalism, or anthropology and writing in the same courses for students, and it's almost unheard of here. Maybe in France, France has this reputation of elevating literature, and maybe there is more of that. I heard a great French anthropologist, Claude Levy Strauss. He was still alive, I think, when I was a student in London, and I heard that he actually went to elocution courses. He taught himself as an adult to speak well, to speak eloquently. And I think in the same way that we could teach our students to write in a way that's more comprehensible by the public, or we can leave it. We don't have to remain academics. And I'm honored that creative people like Parizat and Neelam Niharika have taken up my work and transformed it into a means which makes it accessible. It doesn't make it less valuable, but it certainly makes it accessible and maybe more comprehensible to the public, and that we should aim for that. We should absolutely aim for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Barbara. That was an interesting answer, and it's interesting to hear that. I definitely agree that often language is regarded as knowledge, and therefore those who do not have excellent command over English are, not given due credit for their learnings and their skills. But it was equally interesting to hear you say that quit the field if you feel that you cannot contribute towards it. Interesting. डम्बरजीलाई एउटा प्रश्न सोध्न मन लाग्यो. अहिले बारबारलाई नै सोधेको प्रश्नमा बिल्ड गर्दै यहाँ अहिले मैले सुन्दै पनि हामीले उदाहरण दिँदाखेरि दुईटा तीनटा महिलाको मात्रै उदाहरण दिइरहेको छौँ कि दोहोऱ्याइ पारिजातको अनि निहारिकाजीको अनि एक दुईजना अरूको, and not discrediting what they have done because they have done excellent work. But त्यति मात्रै होइन नि त नेपाली समाजमा त महिला त नेपाली समाजमा हामीले अहिले हेर्दाखेरि पनि excellent काम गरिरहेका महिलाहरूलाई देखेका छौँ हैन. त्यही भएर यहाँलाई के प्रश्न गर्न चाहन्छु भने किन त्यही प्रश्न चाहिँ किन ती इन्भिजिबल छन् त? तिनीहरू यति धेरै महिला हुँदै पनि किन हामी चारवटा महिलाको मात्रै नाम लिँदैछौँ? पहिलो प्रश्न. दोस्रो प्रश्न, एकाडेमियाको लिडरशिप पोजिसनमा भएर एउटा पुरुष भएर यहाँले हेर्दाखेरि यसलाई कसरी बदल्न सकिन्छ त? एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिभ कुरातिर नगइकन हेर्दाखेरि एकाडेमियामा वुमेनको रिप्रेजेन्टेसनलाई र वुमेनलाई कसरी एन्थ्रोपोलोजीले रिप्रेजेन्ट गरिरहेछ भन्ने कुरालाई कसरी बदल्न सकिन्छ एउटा पुरुष भएर, नेपाली पुरुष भएर हेर्दा यहाँले कसरी हेर्नुहुन्छ?
Thank you, Sapnaji. It was excellent and wonderful question, very timely. अनि एकदमै बारबाराजीले भन्नुभएकोमा पनि त्यसैमा अलिकति बिल्ड गरेर भन्छु म. यहाँलाई के भन्छु उत्तरमा एउटा कुरा भने every aspect of field अथवा भनौँ our involvement has limitation. यसको सीमा हुन्छ. So what maybe the limitations in terms of limitations of academia भन्दाखेरि अघि बार्बराजीले भन्नुभयो जस्तो एकदमै इम्पेरिकल डेटा वस्तुनिष्ठ वस्तुगत र वस्तुनिष्ठ अध्ययनमा आधारित कङ्क्रिट तथ्यहरू एन्थ्रोपोलोजीले अथवा एकाडेमियाले इन्भल्भ गराउने भयो त्यो एभाइलेबल गराउने भयो सो तर यहाँले अघि प्रश्न गर्नु हुँदाखेरि मलाई एकदमै मन परेको कुरा हिजो एकदम सुदूर पहिला पूर्वमा कुरा गर्दाखेरि त जहाँ नारीको पूजा हुन्छ त्यहाँ देवता खुसी हुन्छन् अथवा हिजोको पौराणिक कालको नेपालको कुरा गर्दाखेरि त एकदमै दुर्गा भवानी एकदमै पार्वती यस्तो शक्ति सम्पन्न अथवा पुरुष बराबरको खालको अवस्थाबाट कसरी यो डिक्लाइन हुँदै 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 आयो भने हिजोको समाज थियो अथवा थिएन अथवा दन्त्य कथा हो अथवा थियो त्यो अथवा आज कसरी भयो भन्ने कुरा भन्दा पनि आज भइराखेको छ भनेर भन्ठान्छु म भइराखेको छ चाहिँ यो अर्थमा भन्ठान्छु कि एकाडेमिया भनेको टु सम एक्सटेन्ट रिसर्चसँग सम्बन्धित भयो रिसर्चले तपाईको तथ्याङ्कहरू एभाइलेबल गराउँछ जस्तो अहिले भलै हामीले 4 जनाको मात्रै कुरा गर्यौं किनभने बार्बराजी हुनुहुन्छ यहाँनिर डाक्टर बार्बरा निम्रे अजिजको सन्दर्भको कुरा भइरहेको हुनाले उहाँले नै उहाँको स्टडीमा जे फोकस भएर आइराख्नु भएको छ उहाँहरू मात्रै हो त्यसैले हामीले फोकस गरे हो तर what is instrumental very much instrumental in terms of bringing in changes in terms of promoting the equality between male and female gender-based equality in Nepalese society bandakari it is basically the political movement so when academia and the university researches अथवा हाम्रो ग्रेजुएट स्टुडेन्ट्सको रिसर्चेसहरुले त्यो तथ्याङ्कहरु स्थिति यो छ भनेर एभाइलेबल गराउँछ भने त्यसलाई that should be I think combined with or that should be put forward and brought forward by the social movements हामीसँग feminist movements हरु women's movements हरु जस्तो नेपालकै कुरा गर्दाखेरि पनि property rights को सम्बन्धमा एउटा डेटा छ तर भनौं न वुमेन्स को सिटिजनशिप राइट को कुरा आमाको नामबाट सिटिजनशिप राइटहरु लिने कुरा सिटिजनशिप लिने कुराहरु पनि आफ्नो सन्तानलाई आइडेन्टिफाई गराउने रिकग्नाइज गराउने राइट महिलामा छैन आफैले जन्म दिएको सन्तानलाई त डेटा त हामीले स्टडी नगरे पनि यहाँ छ तर त्यो कुरालाई महिलालाई अधिकार सम्पन्न कति बेला मात्रै बनाउन सकिन्छ त भन्दाखेरि जति बेला हामीसँग एनफ लेभल अफ पोलिटिकल मुभमेन्ट र सोशल मुभमेन्ट्सहरु सम्भव छ यो हामीले एक्नोलेज गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ कि यो जुन 10 वर्षको विद्रोह छ एउटा त्यो विद्रोहले महिला दलित भनौं न सीमान्तकृत समुदाय र समूहहरुलाई त्यो वर्गलाई एउटा खालको राजनीतिक उचाइ दिएको छ एउटा फोरफ्रन्टमा ल्याएको छ अनि probably those data were available already because of the academic researches in the academia and university research or sabai social science research हरुबाट आइराखेको कुरा हो but when it became possible to raise the level of political awareness and level of political involvement and the level of political leadership of women of the Dalits in Nepalese politics and social system bandakiri it was only after that 10 years long rebellion staged by the Maoists. अनि सोशल मुभमेन्ट्सहरुबाट वुमेन्स मुभमेन्टहरुबाट पनि प्रोपर्टी राइट सम्बन्धी भनौं न अरु राइट सम्बन्धी कुराहरु आइराखेको छ. सो आई वुड लाइक टु हाइलाइट हियर on 2 points. Academia ले हामीलाई तथ्य दिन्छ, हामीलाई डेटा दिन्छ र हामी भन्छौं नि politics is the key to unlock every kind of problems, to solve every kind of problems in society भनेको जस्तो हामीलाई मुभमेन्ट जरुरी चाहिन्छ, एक्टिभिजम जरुरी चाहिन्छ, जरुरी छ जस्तो लाग्छ. अनि यही प्रक्रियाबाट नै वास्तवमा हामी भनौं न एन्थ्रोपोलोजी भनेको त हाम्रो नेपालमा एकदम सानो सबैभन्दा सानो डिपार्टमेन्ट मध्येको हो. हामी एक ढंगले संघर्ष गरिराखेका छौं, तर पनि एउटा डिसिप्लिन study of humanity and study of diversity and study of human agency, the relationship between human agency and the structure भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो विषय चाहिँ एउटा one of the most important विषय जस्तो लाग्छ साइन्सेसहरुमा. अब यो सोशल साइन्सेस, फिजिकल साइन्सेस भनेर बारबार हामी आउँछौं सपनाजी, तर पनि हामी 17th सेन्चुरी सम्मको कुरा गर्दाखेरि यस्तो सोशल साइन्सेस, फिजिकल साइन्सेस भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ थिएन, साइन्सेस भन्ने थियो. हामी त्यो भन्दा अगाडि मेटाफिजिक्स थियो, फरक कुरा हो. सो अहिले चाहिँ हामी पछि गएर अब अहिले त सोशल साइन्सेस भित्र पनि डेभलपमेन्टले अकुपाई गर्ने बित्तिकै इकोनोमिक्स बिकेम मोर डोमिनेन्ट ओभर अदर सोशल साइन्सेस हैन. अब तर म चाहिँ अलिकति पोलिटिकल मुभमेन्टको फरमा छु भनौं न.
हजुर, मैले त्यही क्वेशनलाई अलिकति डिग गर्न चाहे, त्यही टपिकलाई थोरै डिग गर्न चाहे. जादुजी सरी मैले धेरै टाइम लिएकोमा, म यसपछि सकाउँछु. Building on Barbara, this question goes to you as well as Dambarji both. I request Dambarji to answer first. He just talked about the political movement and social movement in Nepal and so on. And we see that women are celebrated as heroes for their extraordinary work at community level or national level. And when they reach to an influential leadership role, merely replicate the same oppressive structure that has been disenfranchising most women. So how have you seen change, or how can you see this changing? Women haru Dambarji महिला पहिला चाहिँ हैन राजनीतिमा पनि उनीहरुको कन्ट्रिब्युसनको लागि सेलिब्रेट गरिएका हुन्छन्. धेरै एक्जाम्पल देख्छौं हामी हैन, स्पेशली माओइस्ट मुभमेन्टमा पनि धेरै महिलाहरुलाई स्ट्रङ गरेर उभ्याइएको थियो उहाँको कन्ट्रिब्युसनलाई. तर पोलिटिकल सिस्टममा छिरेपछि उहाँहरु जुन पोलिटिकल सिस्टमले चाहिँ महिलालाई सानो देखाइराछ, महिलालाई डिभ्याल्यु गरिराछ, त्यसैलाई नै कन्टिन्युटी दिएको देखिन्छ. यसलाई कसरी यसको बदलाव कसरी देख्नुहुन्छ रम्बरजी हजुरले?
यो यहाँले एकदम सही भन्नुभएको छ. यु हेभ रेज्ड एब्सोल्युटली राइट अब क्वेशन इन द सेन्स दैट अहिले हामी हेर्छौं, मैले पोलिटिक्समा पोलिटिकल प्रोसेसलाई चाहिँ मैले मेजर प्रोसेसको रूपमा हेर्छु, मुभमेन्टलाई चाहिँ मेजर प्रोसेसको रूपमा हेर्छु भनेर भन्थे. ओन्ली दोज टु थिङ्स एक्चुअली ब्रिङ इन द रियल चेन्जेस इन द स्ट्याटस अफ वुमेन. तर हामी अहिले जस्तो मैले मेरो डिपार्टमेन्टले हामीले लोकल गभर्नमेन्ट्सहरुको अध्ययन गरिराखेका छौं. जस्तो भनौं न एक ढंगले त संविधानले नै अधिकार सम्पन्न गर्यो, यो अर्थमा कि हाम्रो इलेक्सनको होल प्रोसेसमा जस्तो लोकल गभर्नमेन्ट्सहरुमा आइदर मेयर, उपमेयर अथवा अध्यक्ष अथवा उपाध्यक्ष गाउँपालिकाको हकमा आइदर वान हैज टु बी वुमेन. त्यहाँनिर जेन्डर ब्यालेन्स हुनुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा त कन्फर्म गर्यो, ग्यारेन्टी गर्यो, कानुनले नै सुनिश्चित गर्यो. गरिसकेपछि अध्यक्ष चाहिँ पुरुषहरुले छाने अथवा मेयर पुरुषहरुले छाने, किनभने दे वर इन द डिसिसिभ पोजिसन हैन, उनीहरुको स्ट्याटस त्यो छ. त्यसभित्र हामीले चाहे जे यो एउटा प्याट्रिआर्कल डोमिनेसन चाहिँ एकदमै जमेर त्यो नर्थ अमेरिकामा स्नो चाहिँ बरफ बनेर जमे जस्तो जमेर बस्या छ, यो पग्लिन सकेका छैन। तर उपमेयर चाहिँ महिलालाई सेकेन्डरी पोजिसन चाहिँ महिलालाई गर्दा गर्दै पनि 93% of the deputy mayor or vice chair of the local governments are they happen to be women. हगी त्यो अनि त्यसलाई फर्काएर पर लग्यो भनेदेखि तपाईको यो जुरिडिकल काउन्सिल अनि यो डेभलपमेन्ट प्रोजेक्ट्सहरुको मोनिटर गर्ने कुराहरु अनि बजेटहरुलाई पास गर्ने कुराहरु र बजेटहरु बनाउने कुराहरु भनेको स्थानीय सरकारको एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण कुराहरुको फेरि कोअर्डिनेसन चाहिँ संयोजक चाहिँ फेरि उपमेयर हुन्छ। त्यसको मतलब त हामी त्यो न्याय सम्पादन प्रणालीमा पनि अनि विकास योजनाहरुलाई कसरी प्रायोरिटीमा राख्ने भन्ने कुराहरुमा पनि अनि अर्को कुरा त्यो विकास कार्यहरुको प्रोजेक्टहरुको अनुगमन गर्ने कुराहरुमा पनि अनि कुन कुन सेक्टरमा कति कति बजेटहरु हामीले एलोकेट गर्ने भन्ने कुरामा पनि उपमेयरले संयोजन गर्नुपर्ने हुनाले त्यो बाध्यकारी परिस्थिति त्यो ऐनले नै ग्यारेन्टी गरिदिएको स्थितिमा र हिजो सेकेन्डरी पोजिसनमा मात्रै उनीहरुलाई उपमेयरको उठाउने महिलालाई चान्स दिने भन्दा पनि 93% त्यो हुँदाखेरि र यता कानुनलाई फर्केर हेर्दाखेरि त एउटा डिसिसिभ पोजिसनमा रहेछ भनेपछि अहिले पनि हामीले तर अध्ययन गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ फेरि रिप्रेजेन्टेसन एज सच नम्बरको रूपमा मात्रै पर्सेन्टेजको रूपमा मात्रै तर धेरै जसो देखिए पनि अपर्चुनिटी इज अभाइलेबल अलरेडी देयर। मौका त भयो। अब हुन सक्छ एक निर्वाचन अब समयमै निर्वाचन गर्यो भने अबको यो 5 वर्षको एक निर्वाचनमा एउटा सिकाइ भयो, महिलाहरुबाट पनि अनुभव भयो होला, अनुभव संकलन भयो होला। सो हामी त्यो इभोल्युसनरी कन्टेक्स्टबाट हेर्दाखेरि रिभोल्युसनरी पोइन्ट स्पिडमा छैन तर इभोल्युसनरी एस्पेक्टबाट हेर्ने हो भने अबको नेक्स्ट लोकल गभर्नमेन्ट्सको इलेक्सनले चाहिँ अझ बढी सक्षमता अझ बढी चाहिँ त्यो व्यवस्थित गर्दै जान्छ होला भनेर म चाहिँ आशावादी छु सपनाजी त्यो प्रोसेसबाट। अनि यो साथसाथमा अब हामीले हरेक यो पोलिटिकल दैनिकी भित्र पनि हामीले सुनिराखेका कुरा हो कि अलिकति डेरोगेटरी सेन्समा अलिकति सार्कास्टिक सेन्समा महिलाहरुको इन्भल्भमेन्टलाई पोलिटिकल लिडरशिपलाई उडाउने पनि हाम्रो पोलिटिकल लिडरशिपबाट भएको छ तर यो कुराहरु पनि कम हुँदै जान्छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई।
Dhanyavad Dambarji. Barbara, I don't know how much you understood what Dambarji had said. I'd like to ask you the same question, but I would like to request you to, rather than seeing just from the political perspective, I would like you to see it, talk from the perspective of an anthropologist who sees social change. And I would like you to briefly talk about how, while working within this system that hasn't worked for women, how do you see change happening? And this is my last question, I promise.
Yes, I could follow Professor Dunbar. And it's a big question, and this dialogue has to go on. And I look forward to joining the students at the university at TU in his department to continue this. I'm not myself a member of the communist movement here, but I mean, the teaching of Marx is that the revolution has to continue, and that has to happen also in terms of the struggle for civil rights and women's rights. We are co-opted. We work hard. We gain equality in terms of quotas, and we show our capability professionally. We achieve status, and we're independent. But then we're co-opted. We're sucked into the system, which is our radical ideology. We concerned about raising our families, about earning a living. We may be able to live independently. We may be able to divorce and sustain ourselves economically, but we're still in a system which where we often lose our ideology, and that happens everywhere. Speaking as living in America, I want to bring up the civil rights movement here, which many of you will know about. And in the 60s, it's what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X achieved was extraordinary. And it helped, I think it also stimulated the feminist movement. But for African Americans, it opened up so many doors. Departments of African American studies were opened, and African Americans who were already quite capable were brought into the universities and had a terrific impact and inspired so many people who broke the chains. Even in the 1960s, there were laws that held people back. Anyway, I think many of you know that. And then all of this slipped away after the 60s, step by step. It lasted maybe 15 years and gradually slipped away, slip. Departments of African American studies were closed. The number of African Americans in prison grew. The poverty, these are well known now. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we have realized just how much we lost, and still how a new revolution in civil rights in America is absolutely necessary. So that is a historical process. We have to accept it, and we have to encourage a few individuals who break away and who become. I mean, look what the Maoists accomplished, as the professor said. Extraordinary. And women would not be where they are in Nepal today without that. That process has to go on. Many people are disillusioned by that Maoist movement, the democracy movement, but they also need to realize how successful it was. And it was, compared to other countries in the world, as I have mentioned to my Nepali friends, it was almost bloodless. So many other countries have, it's cost them much, much more. And so, again, we need to encourage people who break away and want, whether it's our own children or whether it's our students, if they break away and want to keep that radical movement going through journalism or through law, we need to encourage that. And I'll end with that.
Thank you, Barbara. I like the answer that we need to stimulate the exit or break away from replicating the system that's not really working for women. Jadaji, it's back to you. Thank you for giving me time.
Okay, thank you, Sapna. सुशीलजी सित केही छन्?
हजुर नमस्कार, धन्यवाद जादुजी। प्रश्न त धेरै प्रश्न उब्जिएको अवस्था रह्यो डम्बरजीको अहिलेको कुराकानीबाट। तर म एउटा पार्टिसिपेन्ट मात्रै भएकोले म धेरैवटा प्रश्नमा जानलाई मिल्दैन, अरूको समय म नखाउँ। त्यसले गर्दा एउटै प्रश्नमा केही कुराहरू समेट्नु पर्ने भयो। डम्बरजी तपाईँ डिपार्टमेन्ट प्रमुख, त्यसले गर्दा तपाईँ आशावादी हुनुहुन्छ भन्ने मेरो सोचाइ थियो, तर तपाईँले त निराशावादी कुराहरू धेरै गर्नुभयो। त्यसले गर्दाखेरि यो निराशावादी अवस्थाबाट सकारात्मक कुराहरू रिजल्ट कसरी ल्याउने भनेर एउटा गाह्रो देखियो। तपाईँले त्यसलाई कसरी लिनुभएको छ? दोस्रो कुरा, नेपाल अनुसन्धानका हिसाबले एउटा भर्जिन ल्यान्ड हो। अझ सोसियल यो पोलिटिकल इकोनोमिक यो क्षेत्रबाट हेर्ने हो भनेदेखि त यो एकदमै र ल्यान्ड नै हो र तपाईँ डिपार्टमेन्ट हेड हुनुहुन्छ। यस बेला तपाईँले आफूलाई त्यो ठाउँमा हेर्दाखेरि तपाईँको डिपार्टमेन्टले ती क्षेत्रमा कसरी काम गर्नुपर्छ र के गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने योजना तपाईँले बनाउनु भएको छ कि छैन? या फेरि पनि योगमाया र दुर्गादेवीको कुरा ल्याउनलाई बारबारा युरोप अमेरिकाबाट जानुपर्ने, नेपालका अरू यो क्याराभनलाई बाहिर ल्याउनको लागि एरिक भ्याली जानुपर्ने, यी अवस्थाहरू किन रहन्छन्? तपाईँको डिपार्टमेन्टले जे उत्पादन गर्छ, तपाईँको डिपार्टमेन्टको उत्पादन खपत हुने एनजिओ आइएनजिओ हो या तपाईँको डिपार्टमेन्टले उत्पादन गर्ने उत्पादन रिसर्चका लागि प्रयोग हुने मेन पावर हो? र तपाईँले आफ्नै डिपार्टमेन्टबाट चाहिँ तपाईँले सरकारले बजेट कम दिएको छ भन्नुभयो, सब कुरा भन्नुभयो, त्यो नेपालमा सबै क्षेत्रमा त्यही नै होला। तर तपाईँको डिपार्टमेन्टले के विषयमा रिसर्च गर्यो, आफैले गर्ने रिसर्च र गभर्मेन्टलाई अथवा पोलिसी मेकरलाई यो हुनुपर्छ भनेर के दियो, त्यस्ता तपाईँसँग केही उदाहरण छन् कि? अनि अहिलेको अवस्थाबाट हेर्दाखेरि महिलाको लामो समय नजाउँ, आउँदो 10 वर्ष 1 दशक भनौँ अथवा 2 दशकभित्र महिलाको अवस्था तपाईँहरूको डिपार्टमेन्टको रिसर्चबाट चाहिँ के देख्नुहुन्छ? यो एङ्गलबाट तपाईँले के हेर्नु भएको छ?
धन्यवाद सुशीलजी। मैले अलिकति निराशावादी कुरा गरेँ भने ओभरअल यो हाम्रो युनिभर्सिटीको स्ट्रक्चर, हाम्रो सिस्टम, हाम्रो गभर्मेन्टको जुन अहिले पोजिसन छ, हाम्रो ब्युरोक्रेसीको जुन अकर्मण्यता छ, हाम्रो न्यायपालिका, कार्यपालिका र व्यवस्थापिका समेत सबैभन्दा अहिले दर्दनाक स्थितिमा छ। त्यो हामीले यहाँनिर भन्न पर्दैन। अनि त्यसैको स्टेट युनिभर्सिटीका रूपमा हाम्रो त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालय भएको हुनाले यो हाम्रो सिस्टमको अकर्मण्यतालाई मैले छोप्न जरुरी छैन र ढोङ गर्न पनि जरुरी छैन। I have been telling time and again for the last 3-4 years that our Tribhuvan University is too big to function. हाम्रो क्यापासिटी छैन। त्रिभुवन युनिभर्सिटीको मात्रै हैन, गभर्नमेन्टकै केही क्यापासिटी छैन। 4 वर्ष अगाडि ट्रायल पास गरेको ड्राइभिङ लाइसेन्स एउटा मसिनबाट फुत्त प्रिन्ट गरेर दिन सक्दैन। सो इन अ वे हाम्रो स्टेट भनेको अनडिक्लेयर्ड बट फेल्ड स्टेट जस्तै हो। यो मलाई एकाडेमिया र मलाई युनिभर्सिटीको टिचिङ यो अर्थमा मन पर्छ कि मैले यो भन्दा पनि मेरो जागिर खुस्की हाल्दैन। तर सुशीलजीलाई मैले के भन्न चाहन्छु भने यति लेभलको एउटा खालको फ्रिडम अफ स्पिच हामी युनिभर्सिटीकोहरूलाई छ, त्यो हामीले इन्जोय गरेका छौँ। तर मेरो डिपार्टमेन्टको सन्दर्भमा कुरा गर्यो भने मैले नलेज प्रोडक्सनको सन्दर्भमा, हाम्रो रिसर्च क्यापेबिलिटीको सन्दर्भमा मैले यहाँलाई मेरो साइट पनि पठाउँला, मेरो डिपार्टमेन्टको साइट पनि पठाउँला डीएम गरेर, अथवा anthropology@tu edu.np गरेर गर्नु पनि हेर्न सक्नुहुन्छ। हामी खास गरेर नेपालको डाइभर्सिटीको अध्ययनमा सोशल इन्क्लुजन र एफर्मेटिभ एक्सनको अध्ययनको सन्दर्भमा हामी युनिभर्सिटी लेभलमा मात्रै हैन कि गभर्नमेन्ट लेभलमा पनि हामी चाहिँ लिडिङ मात्रै हैन कि अथेन्टिक डेटा ओनरको र सर्वे अन्डरटेक गर्ने एउटा संस्थाको रूपमा हामी आफूलाई दाबी गर्छौं। गएको 10 वर्षमा 2 वटा सर्वेहरू हामीले गर्यौं। यहाँ पनि मैले साथीहरू देखिराखेका छु, विनोदजी हुनुहुन्छ, अरु साथीहरू हुनुहुन्छ। सोशल इन्क्लुजन सर्वे भनेर नेशनल सर्वे गर्ने हामी मात्रै हो। अहिले हामीले सर्वे गर्दाखेरि 37,000 प्लस हाउस होल्डको सर्वे हामीले गरेका छौं। तपाई सेन्ट्रल ब्युरो अफ स्ट्याटिस्टिक्सले गर्ने, राष्ट्र बैंकले गर्नेहरू भन्ने पनि उनीहरूले लिने स्याम्पलहरू पनि योभन्दा ठुलो हुँदैन, योभन्दा सानोहरूबाटै गरिराखेको हुन्छ हगि। सो हामीसँग मलाई यो भन्नमा गर्व लाग्छ कि हामी त्यो लेभलको रिसोर्सलाई जेनेरेट गर्ने, इन्टरनेसनल लेभलमा बिडिङ गर्ने र त्यो अनुसन्धान गर्ने क्यापासिटी हामीसँग छ। हामीले पब्लिश पनि हामी भूकम्पको पछि काठमाडौँ भ्याली लगायत वरिपरिका 11 जिल्ला समेत गरेर 14 जिल्लाको सर्वे कम्युनिटी रेजिलियन्स क्यापासिटीमा स्टेट विक हुँदा पनि, इन्टरनेसनल एजेन्सीजहरू आउन ढिलो गर्दा पनि वास्तवमा कम्युनिटी लेभलमा कसरी समुदायहरू आफैले यो भूकम्पले दिएको जो धक्का छ यसलाई रेजिलियन्ट वेमा उनीहरूले डिल गर्यो, कसरी आफ्नो सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक सारा खालका पुँजीहरू सम्बन्धहरू कायम त्योबाट उनीहरू आफू बचेर बसे र कसरी बिस्तारै स्टेट र इन्टरनेसनल एजेन्सीजहरू आयो भने हामीले कम्युनिटी रेजिलियन्स क्यापासिटी भनेर हामीले पोहोरमा त्यो 21 को डिसेम्बरमा मात्रै हामीले रिपोर्ट पब्लिस गर्यौं। त्यसैले अहिले नेपाल गभर्नमेन्टले मात्रै हैन विश्वभरिले गएको 15 इयर्समा मिलेनियम डेभलपमेन्ट गोल्सहरू सकिएपछि सस्टेनेबल डेभलपमेन्ट गोल्स 2030 सम्ममा पिसफुल र हार्मोनियस सोसाइटी निर्माण गर्ने भन्ने जुन युएन को जुन एउटा गोल छ, नेपालले पनि 40-45 वटा इन्डिकेटर्सहरुमा काम गरिराखेको छ, यसमा पनि सेट गरेको छ। तर हाम्रो नेपाली समाज, नेपालको गभर्नमेन्टको, हाम्रो विकासको स्थितिमा सस्टेनेबल डेभलपमेन्ट गोल्सको इन्डिकेटर्समा 40 भन्दा बढी इन्डिकेटर्समा हामी कहाँनेर छौं भनेर एकाडेमिकली र प्र्याग्मेटिकली रिसर्च गरेर पब्लिश गर्ने हामी मात्रै हो। गभर्नमेन्टले पनि अलिकति गरेको छ, युएनडीपीले अलिकति गरेर मद्दत गरेर, तर हाम्रो मात्रै हो सस्टेनेबल डेभलपमेन्ट गोल्समा। यही मैले अहिले देखिराखेको छु, डाक्टर मिता सैजु हुनुहुन्छ, शी वाज द वान टु लिड दैट प्रोजेक्ट। एभ्री प्रोजेक्टमा, एभ्री रिसर्च प्रोजेक्टमा हाम्रो जेन्डर डिसेग्रिगेटेड डेटा, जेन्डर रिलेसन भित्र पनि, वुमेन्स स्ट्याटस भित्र पनि त्यो इन्टरसेक्सनालिटी, त्यो क्याटेगोरिजहरू, सब क्याटेगोरिजहरू, सब इन्डिकेटर्सहरू प्रयोग गरेर हामीले गर्छौं। सो हामीले गभर्नमेन्ट, अनि अर्को कुरो इन्क्लुसिभ गभर्नेन्समा नेपालमा के सिचुएसन छ। इन्क्लुसिभ गभर्नेन्स नट ओन्ली इन टर्म्स अफ मेन एन्ड वुमेन, तर अक्रस डिफ्रेन्ट कास्ट, एथनिक ग्रुप्स कस्तो खालको पोजिसनहरू छ भनेर 5 पिलर्स अफ गभर्नेन्स, यो सुशासनका 5 वटा प्रमुख पिलरहरूको गरेर हामीले मात्रै त मैले भन्दिन यसमा, हामीले त्यसमा पनि रिपोर्ट चाहिँ नेशनल सर्वे गरेर निकालेको छ। त्यो अहिले नेशनल प्लानिङ कमिसनले पनि, गभर्नमेन्टले पनि त्यसलाई एडोप्ट गरेको जस्तो देखिन्छ। सो हामी एउटा, वी आर नट ओन्ली फोकस्ड अन classroom teaching, but we are at the same time, simultaneously, at the same time, equally focusing on research, new surveys, so as to generate new knowledge base as well. त्यसैले हामी मेरो डिपार्टमेन्टको इन्डिभिजुअल क्यापासिटीको कुरा गर्ने हो भने हामी एउटा आफ्ना विषयहरूमा एन्थ्रोपोलोजिकल सब्जेक्ट्सहरूमा टपिक्सहरूमा त्यो फिल्डमा हामी नेसनल सर्वेहरू गरिराखेको पनि छौँ र गरेर हामीले डेटा हामीले एभाइलेबल पनि गराइराखेका छौँ। त्यो सम्बन्धमा अब वुमेनको पोजिसन कसरी चेन्जिङ छ तपाईको भनौँ न हरेक कुराहरूमा ब्युरोक्रेसीमा रिप्रेजेन्टेसनको कुरा गर्दाखेरि अथवा म्याटर्नल हेल्थ सिचुएसनमा अथवा एजुकेसनमा अथवा अन्य ह्युमन डेभलपमेन्ट इन्डस्ट्रिजहरूभित्र महिलाको मात्रै होइन कि महिलाभित्र पनि हाई कास्ट महिलाको पोजिसन के, आदिवासी जनजाति महिलाको पोजिसन के, दलित महिलाहरूको पोजिसन के, होइन मधेसी महिलाहरूको पोजिसन के, मुस्लिम महिलाहरूको पोजिसन के, हरेक कुराहरू डिसएग्रिगेटेड लेभलमा डेटा जेनेरेट गरेका छौँ हामीले। तर मैले फ्रस्ट्रेसन कहाँनिर व्यक्त गर्छु यहाँलाई सुशीलजी भन्दाखेरि संसारभरि भन्दिनँ म, युरोपमा, नर्थ अमेरिकामा universities are the one which are considered as authentic data and knowledge producing institutions, data producing, data generating and survey conducting institutions. US मा पनि तपाईको मैले देख्दैखेरि एग्रिकल्चर साइन्सेसहरू लाइभस्टक रिसर्चेसहरू गर्यो भने कर्नेलले धेरै रिसर्चहरू गर्छ। अघि फोरेस्ट्रीको यहाँ मेरो कलिग डाक्टर जनक राई हुनुहुन्छ, उहाँ हि वेन्ट टु युनिभर्सिटी अफ मिशिगन एन आर्बरमा जानुभयो, त्यो स्टेट युनिभर्सिटी हो। त्यहाँ फोरेस्ट्री सम्बन्धी रिसर्चहरू नेसनल लेभलकै छ भने पनि उहाँहरूले लिन्छ। उहाँहरूले लिएको रिसर्चलाई चाहिँ अथेन्टिक मान्छ। अक्सफोर्डले गर्छ, हेर्नुहोस् न, क्याम्ब्रिजले गर्छ। अहिले हामी यत्रो पेन्डेमिक कोभिड-19 को पेन्डेमिकभित्र सबैभन्दा अथेन्टिक र सबैभन्दा बढी रिसर्च गर्ने त आखिर जोन्स हपकिन्स नै भयो नि त। यहाँ तपाईले बार मैले डिपार्टमेन्ट हेडको रूपमा मैले बार सुन्नुपर्छ यस्तो रिसर्चहरू गर्दाखेरि। प्लानिङ कमिसनमा हामी जान्छौँ, गभर्नमेन्टका सचिवहरू, ब्युरोक्रेट्सहरू, सहसचिवजीहरू, मन्त्रीहरूले त्यसो भन्ने आँट गर्दैनन्। तर नेपाली ब्युरोक्रेसी यति कन्जर्भेटिभ र यति ट्रेडिसनल छ कि युनिभर्सिटी अथेन्टिक अर्गनाइजेसन होइन रिसर्च गर्न र नलेज जेनेरेट गर्न भनेर भन्छ।
ओहो,
हामी बाँच्छौँ। म लिटरली बाँच्छु, झगडा गर्छु। सो यस्तो अवस्थामा सुशीलजी हामीले काम गरिरहेका छौँ। आई थिङ्क तर एकै सेन्टेन्समा भन्नु पर्दाखेरि मेरो विषय र मेरो डिपार्टमेन्ट नेपालमा आफ्नो विषयमा जो मैले सोशल इन्क्लुजन र सोशल डाइभर्सिटीको स्टडीमा भनेर भने, यसमा प्राग्मेटिक स्टडी, एकाडेमिक स्टडीमा मलाई लाग्छ हामी अथेन्टिक भनेर भन्दैनौँ, तर वी आर द क्यापेबल, वी आर वान अफ द मोस्ट क्यापेबल institutions in terms of undertaking those kind of researches in Nepal.
Thank you, Professor Chemjong. हामी एप्रिसिएट गर्छौँ राम्रो कुरालाई त, अझै राम्रो हुनुपर्छ भन्ने हो टुटीवाला त्यो प्रश्नमा। गोविन्दजी जोडिनु भएको छ। गोविन्दजी, कसलाई के प्रश्न छ? ओभर टु यु। गोविन्दजी सुन्दै हुनुहुन्छ?
नमस्कार सबैलाई नमस्कार। मलाई अब यो हामी जेन्डर इक्वालिटीकै प्रसङ्गमा भनौँ अथवा जसरी भन्दाखेरि पनि हाम्रो सोसाइटीमा यो कास्ट सिस्टमले गरेको इम्प्याक्टमा डाक्टर अम्बेडकरको भूमिकाले कतिको प्राथमिकता पायो भनेदेखि सल्युसनतिर जान सक्छ होला, अथवा गान्धीले सोचे जस्तो अप्पर कास्टले नै लोवर कास्टलाई सोल्युसन दिन सक्ला भन्ने खालको जिज्ञासा चाहिँ छ। यति राखेँ मैले। धन्यवाद।
कसलाई हो यो जिज्ञासा?
इङ्ग्लिसमा भन्नुपर्ने हुन्छ कि बुझ्नुहुन्छ भने?
बुझ्नुहुन्न कि म भनिदिउँ? होइन, तपाईँले भन्नुहुन्छ भन्दा
भन्दिनु।
Okay, Barbara, you got a question. Govinda want to ask you, like the role of caste, how caste system, as we know in our society, caste system is prevalent, and there are two approaches. One approach, the Ambedkar approach, which says that the downtrodden people, or lower caste people, should be uplifted, and then only the change is possible. And another approach is Gandhian approach, in where he focuses into upper caste, and even they can bring the change in society. Which approach do you think works more in terms of gender equality and all?
It's a big discussion opening up here. There's a discussion about this even in America, where now the term caste is being applied to especially the difference between white and black Americans. And there's a new book by that name, Caste, which I haven't read, but some of you may know it. It's personally, I believe that government laws to offset the dominance of one group are very, very important. Again, people need to be educated in order to use these laws. And coming back to Durga Devi, she knew she did not call for reform the way Yogamaya had. Yogamaya wanted to overturn caste completely. And by the way, I think to call her a woman's rights advocate and champion is limiting her. She was she advocated the destruction of caste and of the power of the priests. And I think that was a far greater threat, in fact, to the government and why they couldn't accommodate her at all than her advocacy for women's rights. Durga Devi was much more concerned with women's rights and used the courts. Durga Devi was educated by her father, and she learned law. You know, this is in the 40s and 50s. And she did not challenge the government. She used the courts to fight for her own rights as a member of a family. And she was a child widow, and used that to fight for other women, and also even used the courts against abuse against anyone, men or women. So it's not, you know, it's not just the law. It is the determination of people to fight for what the law has given us. And we in the United States now are fighting for voting rights. Can you believe it? You know, that there is a cutback of the rights of voters. And we're going back 40, 50 years to fight for what we thought had been won so long ago. So, again, I guess both. We fight for both. You know, there has to be political upheaval, political reform, political sacrifice, and also the gradual movement of I was speaking with some friends the other day here in America, and they feel the Janjati movement has lost steam and has lost its power and has not succeeded. I didn't know that. They also belong to a Jat, I guess you call it, which is not, among the top two. So, I guess we fight on all fronts, and again, some of us have to be have to sacrifice more to do that, or we work even within the family. There's still so much in terms of relations between brothers and sisters, changing some of the very basic family rituals hasn't been touched at all. And so we have to, again, I do it in my way as an individual, fighting against Islamic values or Christian social norms, or we do it in our own family, and then we write about it to extend. And I find personally, as an Arab, just finding my own voice within a friendship group, or even, say, professional, just speaking up and not allowing people to assume certain things, not imposing their values on me, and trying to be proud and yet be honest. That's very important. The struggle begins personally, doesn't it? I'd like to hear how others deal with these things personally.
Thank you, Barbara. And here I got a really good question. I think I should mention this. Namaste to everyone. My question to Dr. Barbara. Today you have mentioned Parijat as a key person to introduce you about Yogmaya and her movement. And it seems that Parijat has influenced you in shaping thoughts in relationship to your own route and academia you represent of the time. Now I'm keen to know from your empirical knowledge over the years that how shaping of self and shaping of thoughts mean for women in toxic masculine old order. It will help to young feminists disoriented in neoliberal world. I think this is the question to Barbara.
Could you rephrase it? It's a little difficult.
Yeah, she meant to say that on the basis of your knowledge of these many years, how shaping of self and shaping of thoughts of are important for females in this very toxic masculine old order, and how these changed thoughts will help all feminists to disorient this neoliberal old order, which I think doesn't give space much to females.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't turn my mic off there. It's still on. Obviously, I feel it's absolutely critical. If we can't articulate our own feelings, and if we're afraid of other people's opinions, and if we feel we cannot express ourselves, we'll never do anything as women. And this applies to everyone. This applies to the different castes as well. It's scary. It's really frightening to come out, whether it's you're sexually different, or if you're in a different gender or a different religion to the dominant one. It's really scary, and you need a few, at least one friend who may be your mother or it may be your brother to support you. I think it begins with the individual, and I think it begins with the family. And going back to Durga Devi, she had a sasu. She was a child widow, but she still had to go to her husband's house, and her sasu became her best friend and shared with her the house deeds, the property deeds, so Durga could take those to court. And in so many ways, also, they tried to remarry Durga, and her sasu revealed the plan to her, and Durga Devi thwarted the plan for her brothers-in-law, her Dewar, to get rid of her. So we need an ally somewhere. You know, it may be somebody in the university, in school, a teacher. I think family is very, very important, very important. And many women have that support from their father, for example, but maybe not from their brother. And if you're in a system of this inequality and your brother, I'm talking about women now, right? If your brother reinforces the patriarchy, you're still in trouble because we love our brothers, right? We have our Baitika, and we have to honor our brothers. Very interesting ritual, that. And so I'll just end there. But these are great. This is a great discussion. Great discussion. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There is one interesting question from a journalist, a renowned journalist of Nepal, Devendra Bhattrai. He wants to ask this question, and I find it pretty interesting. He says that when you are making a hero to Yogmaya and Durga Devi, so many heroes, they become a secondary hero in process of making a Yogmaya a primary hero. What is your take on this? What do you want to say to this question?
Yes, thanks. Devendra, I know him quite well. We've worked together, I think, over the years. I like him very much and don't see him enough. It's great. That's great. Why not? Because I may be more attracted to Durga Devi and he may be inspired by Yogmaya's work. And then another one, as I said, maybe Pasang Sherpa or one of the Maoist women fighters. So the more the better. One is not enough.
Okay, the question of shadowing is always there. You know, like when you count, this is one, there should be, the next one is always a second. There is on the question, this is from Lamu Serpa. She writes, do you believe there is an association between marriage and patriarchy? Since marriage is mostly for the management of assets and follows a longevity model, how can Nepali women regain power in this cultural patriarchy matrix? Did you get the question?
Wow, I got it. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the family, I think I was reading an article not long ago. I'm sorry, I can't give the reference, but patriarchy is the marriage is a patriarchal institution, according to many feminists. It was set up to control the identity of offspring and the distribution of property, which passes through the men, largely, everywhere. So I think there's very little question about it, although there may be people who, and this goes back to Yogmaya's fight for widows to have a new partnership. And it's fiercely denied. And still today it takes a great deal of courage for a single woman, for example, because she refuses to enter into the patriarchal marriage structure. She has a lot of difficulties in the society, and even to purchase property herself or to take property from her share from the family if she's single. And in the United States also, for a long time, many of us who were professionals, we didn't have our own bank account when we were married, or women here never bought a house on her own, or was not given a mortgage by the banks. So absolutely, economy is a big part of this.
Interesting. म एउटा प्रश्न प्रोफेसर चेम्जोङलाई सोध्छु, अनि यही प्रश्नमा अलिकति बारबारलाई पनि छ, त्यो म पछि जोडौँला। उहाँ के लेख्नुहुन्छ भने, मेरो नाम नलिनु होला, भूगोल अनुसार नेपालमा बसोबास फरक छ, बसाइसराई फरक छ, खुल्ला बोर्डर छ। विभिन्न कालखण्डमा 1947 भारतबाट छिरेका र 1959 मा तिब्बतबाट छिरेका विभिन्न शरणार्थी बसेको मुलुक देखिन्छ। यो बसाइ सरेर आएको परिवारको महिला, मध्य पहाडी क्षेत्र र तराई क्षेत्रको महिलाहरू बीच राजनैतिक सहभागिता, आर्थिक रूपान्तरण र सामाजिक रूपान्तरण बीच सूचकाङ्क लगायतका आधारमा के भिन्नता पाउनुहुन्छ?
मैले भन्न पर्यो पहिलो उत्तर।
मैले तपाईलाई सोधेँ, अनि म उसको पार्ट चाहिँ उसतिरै जान्छु।
अब यो 1947 मा 1959 मा यसरी आयो भन्ने कुरा हामीले आफ्नो आफ्नो तर्फबाट विश्वास गर्ने कुरा हो। त्यो मलाई त्यत्रो मैले व्यक्तिगत तवरमा त्यत्रो मैले विश्वास गर्दिनँ। 59 मा उत्तरतिरबाट आएको त अब अझै अब त्यहाँ त्यस्तो उमा छैन जस्तो लाग्छ। अब औपचारिक रूपमै अफिसियली नै कतिपय ठाउँमा क्याम्पहरू खडा गरेको छ। अब ओपन बोर्डरको सन्दर्भ आयो, तर यो लेभलमा अहिले भर्खरै जनगणनाको रिजल्ट आउँदाखेरि पनि हामी अब यसभित्र जनगणना कसरी लिने भनेर हामी एकदमै परम्परागत र प्राचीन जस्तै लाग्ने त्यो खालको प्रश्नहरू तयार राखेर गरिराखेका छौँ। मैले व्यक्तिगत तहमा पनि हिजो जनगणना कसरी लिने भनेर हामीले परिभाषाहरू डिफाइन गर्दाखेरि यो लेभलको यो इन्टरनल अनि आउट माइग्रेसन, इन माइग्रेसनहरूको स्थिति त्यो थिएन। अहिले नेपालको जनसङ्ख्याको ठुलो हिस्सा बाहिर छ। बाहिर भएकोलाई 6 महिनाभन्दा बाहिर भएकोलाई नगन्ने भन्ने छ, तर त्यो 6 महिनाभन्दा बढी बाहिर भएकोले नै रेमिट गरेर नेपालको अर्थतन्त्र धानिएको छ र उहाँहरूले पठाएकै कुराहरू यहाँ छाना फेरेर, यहाँ मोबाइल भिरेर, यहाँ लाइभ स्टकहरू गाईबस्तु किनेर जोडेपछि त्यो सबै गणना हुन्छ। भनेपछि जनगणना कसरी गर्ने भन्ने कुरा जस्तो परिभाषाकै सन्दर्भको कुरा, यसलाई कस्तो प्रश्न समावेश गर्ने भन्ने कुरा पनि एकदमै दुनियाँमा सबभन्दा थोरै आउट माइग्रेसन हुने भनेको अहिले पनि युएस नै होला। जनगणनाको सेन्सस लिने कुरा युएसमै हो पहिलो पटक लिएको। अब युएसमा इन माइग्रेसन बढी छ, आउट माइग्रेसन छ जस्तो त्यस्तो लाग्दैन, अथवा कसरी लिन्छ। हाम्रोबाट त आउट माइग्रेसन, सिजनल माइग्रेसन, यो अब अहिले त्यो वर्क फोर्सको रूपमा बाहिर गइरहेछ। तर अहिले यति हुँदाहुँदै पनि अहिले चाहिँ ट्रेन्डमा घटेको वृद्धि दरै एकदमै घटेको देखियो भने हामी कहिलेकाहीँ यो पोलिटिकल कन्जम्सनका लागि अनि नेपालमा त्यो राष्ट्रवाद भन्ने बुझाइ अलिकति गलत अर्थमा बुझिएको छ इन्टरनेसनल रिलेसन्स भन्ने कुरालाई यहाँ राष्ट्रवाद भनेर बुझिन्छ नेसनलिजम भनेर अनि इट इज यही सन्दर्भको कुरा मैले हाम्रो स्कलरसिप चाहिँ एकदमै विक छ भनेर पनि भन्ने गर्छु मै विक पनि हुन सक्छ मलाई नै क्रिटिक गरे पनि भयो त्यसो हुँदा त्यो 47 र 59 मा ठुलो भनौँ न पपुलेसन फ्लक्स इनमाइग्रेसन भयो भन्ने कुरा नै म चाहिँ त्यति विश्वास गर्दिन अनि इनमाइग्रेसन भएको भन्दा ठुलो उमा चाहिँ हाम्रोबाट आउट माइग्रेसन भइराखेको छ भन्ने कुरा त हामीले कोभिड-19 को त्यो आउटब्रेकका बेलामा कसरी भनौँ न इन्डियाबाट अरू देशबाट कति मान्छे फर्कियो त्योबाट पनि हामीले काउन्ट गर्न सक्छौँ हाम्रोबाट सिजनल माइग्रेन्ट वर्करको रूपमा इन्डियातिर फर्किने त्यस्तो विशाल उमा थिएन तर उताबाट आउने त हामीले देख्यौँ नि त त्यसो हुँदाखेरि पनि हामी कुन कन्जम्सनका लागि यो कुराहरू गरिराखेका छौँ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ महत्त्वपूर्ण होला जस्तो लाग्छ म पर्सनल्ली त्यो लेभलमा बाहिरको जनसङ्ख्याले हाम्रो यहाँको जनसङ्ख्यालाई आउटनम्बर गर्दैछ अथवा एकदमै ठुलो इम्प्याक्ट पार्दैछ भन्ने कुरा एक मैले विश्वास गर्दिनँ पर्सनल्ली दुई म चाहिँ आई बिलिभ इन इनर्मस क्यापेसिटी that every individual carries on in terms of making his or her living हरेक मान्छेले यो मामला म अलिकति मार्क्सिस्टमा विश्वास गर्छु हरेक मान्छेले आफूलाई चाहिने भन्दा बढी उत्पादन गर्न सक्छ त्यो क्यापेसिटी हरेक मान्छेसँग हुन्छ हामी अर्काको जनसङ्ख्या अर्को देशकोबाट आएर हामी चाहिँ हामी यहाँको नेपालीहरू चाहिँ एकदम आउटनम्बर भएर उनीहरूले आउटनम्बर हामीलाई गरेर हाम्रो रिसोर्सेसहरू त्यता जान्छ भन्ने विश्वास नै वास्तवमा अलिकति एक खालको गलत विश्वास एउटा खालको भ्रम हो कि जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ अर्को कुरा अब हामी हिजोअस्तिसम्म चाहिँ विकासको सन्दर्भको कुरा पढ्दाखेरि जादुजी नेपालको विकासका अवरोधहरू के हुन् भनेर भन्दाखेरि अत्यधिक जनसङ्ख्या वृद्धि भनेर भन्थ्यौं अनि हाम्रोमा वास्तवमा 2.67% चाहिँ पपुलेसन ग्रोथ रेट पनि थियो अब अहिले त हामी बिलो 1 मा झर्यौं 0.93 मा झर्यो हैन त्यो पनि वृद्धि त हो तर हिजो त्यो बेलामा हाम्रोमा वृद्धि भइरहँदाखेरि हामी चाहिँ हाम्रो विकासको मूल अवरोधकै रूपमा जनसङ्ख्याको अत्यधिक वृद्धि त्यो चापलाई खप्न सक्दैन ठेक्न सक्दैन भनेर भन्थ्यौं भने अहिले चाहिँ अलिकति परिभाषाहरूलाई हाम्रो अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङहरूलाई फेर्न पर्छ कि हरेक मान्छे जन्मिन्छ भने उनले क्षमता र आफूले उपभोग गर्ने भन्दा बढी उत्पादन गर्ने क्षमता लिएर जन्मन्छ चाइना गरिब भएको र दुःख पाएको अत्यधिक जनसङ्ख्याले भन्दै चाइना त कहाँ पुग्यो त्यसो हुँदा यो जनसङ्ख्याको चाप बाहिरबाट आइराखेको छ उबाट आइराखेको छ भन्ने कुरा को त्यो फन्डामेन्टल बेसिस छ भन्नेमै मैले अलिकति विश्वास गर्दिन जादुजी
धन्यवाद सेमजङ सर यही क्वेसनको सेकेन्ड पार्ट थियो त्यो चाहिँ म टेन्टेटिभली अब एक्ज्याक्टली त भन्न गाह्रो होला तर अलिकति यसको क्रक्स लिएर म ट्रान्सलेट गर्न खोज्छु Barbara, the same guy who asked question to Mr. Chemzong asked you because you got the experience of being with this Tibetan people, learning about their culture and all these things, and you have read about many women from around the world. What message we like from our land we can give it to from Nepal or from Nepali women? What message we can deliver to to the world? Is there any interesting message or significant heroes that we can take them to the world?
I'm thinking. It's not for me to say. It's not for me to say. I'm not Nepali. There's a lot of work to be done at home, but at the same time, we belong to an international community. I mean, Nepalis in general are very fortunate. I mean, you have very good PR around the world. You know, everybody loves Nepal. And people I know who are not Nepali, they just don't want to hear about anything adverse, any problems Nepal might have. They have still this very romantic, very positive view of Nepal, and Nepali people are extraordinarily charming. And I'm saying this generally, not genuinely, not to flatter you, but you have a history of nonviolence. You know, again, your revolution was carried out with very low cost compared to so many other countries. And you allowed the king to live, which a lot of people don't, even with property, etc. And, you know, there's individual violence in the family, etc. But in general, very peaceful mentality, I would say. And you are respected for that around the world, to some disadvantage, because I think Nepal gets away with a lot of the corruption and dependence on India or whatever. You know, you're forgiven and you're paid huge sums of money from everybody wants to donate to Nepal. Honestly, everybody I know, you know, people very eager to help Nepal. That's has its downside too, because you're so dependent. Just coming back to your question, I guess somehow it's very important that people return to Nepal, people who've been overseas and enjoyed their success and their reception overseas, rather than begging for money for the disadvantaged in Nepal, because the whole development business is business. Let's face it, it's business. And foreign countries like that. You know, they like a country which is dependent on them. So I think once a lot of very successful Nepalis return to Nepal and really jump in, you can make a lot of headway. I'll end with that.
Okay, there is one other part of his question. He want to say, to bring these so many females of Nepal, so many women of Nepal having diverse background, culture, religion, and so many, so and so. How can we take them into old states? Is there any way like we can bring them to old states collectively?
Bring them where?
Into the old states, they can share their experiences with like African people, Tibetan people, American people, and all their experiences. How to bring them? Is there any way? Or
yeah, just to talk about them. You know, once we know our heroes or heroines, better, we can talk about them. We make films about them. We write novels about them. We write poems about them. Scientific reports don't reach very far. So I think it's the next step, not only for citizens to be proud, but the artistic, the creative people in our society to create films and novels and poems, the kinds of things that reach a very wide audience. And again, to get to our children, right? To write for our children so they grow up with these models in their heads, and so that when Nepalis meet other people from outside, they talk about their own people. They, even if it's your mother, you know, like Neelam Niharika's mother, who was a teacher. A book, her students have now collected stories and written a book which is published about her. I think it's in Nepali, but so that, you know, books, our mother is the first hero, isn't she?
True. Okay, I think that was the question from a listener. Here is Lamu Serpa. She was asking about marriage and patriarchy earlier. I think she will ask the question, and after that, in a minute or two, we'll conclude this session, as Barbara is saying that she is in a hurry to go somewhere. Lamu, over to you. Lamu, are you listening to me? No, I don't think she's listening to us.
लामुजी तपाईको माइक अन गरेर बोल्नुहोस् त। तपाईले माइक अफ गरेर बोल्दै हुनुहुन्छ कि सायद सुन्दै हुनुहुन्छ लामुजी?
हेलो, सुनिरहेको छु। मेरो क्वेशन अघि मैले सोधिसके हजुर। थ्यांक यू।
Okay. I thought she had some other question. This is it, I think. We cannot incorporate everything in one session, but we try to incorporate as much possible. Finally, one interesting question is there. I think that would be a nice question to end this session in light note. Barbara, there is one question. As you said, like you got really close association with Parijat. Not Parijat, like in a sense. I'm sorry. I mixed the question. This question says that you learned about Yogmaya and Yogbadi and all these things. This listener want to know that, like, did you read anything of Yog thing that Yogmaya deliver or anything? She said that any religious, spiritual views and all these things. Did you find anything like that in course of your research?
Did I find it before I arrived there in Aran Valley?
Yeah. And then after, even, you can talk about that.
No, I knew nothing. I stumbled on this. I stumbled completely, naively. As I said, I was probably in a stage of my life where I was searching and maybe searching for my own hero. I didn't realize it. I was engaged in research on Tirtha, pilgrimage sites in Nepal and India. And that was it. I mean, I had, in the course of working with Tibetans in Solu, I had befriended nuns, Tibetan nuns, especially a couple of very elderly women. And because I spoke Tibetan so easily, I could communicate with them very intimately. And I tended to prefer them to the monks. And I obviously they were warm to me, and we were women. We were single women. I felt close. I really felt genuine friendship, and I think because I respected the Tibetan nuns, despite the terrible discrimination against nuns in the Tibetan patriarchy, it was terrible, and it's disgraceful. It was almost a kind of abuse. So I think it was my experience with Tibetan nuns, that intimacy, that when I arrived in Manakamona and met the Bhaktini, who had been followers of Yogmaya, it was easy. It was easy for me to relate to them, to feel comfortable, and they in turn related to me and trusted me, because I did visit Chainpur and Kadbari, and I mentioned that I was down at the ashram, and I'm going to go back there to talk to these women. Oh, they're just waiting to die. These are old ladies, poor ladies. They're marginalized. It was men who told me that, but even some women, why are you interested in them? So that was very important. And then when I found the Hazurbani, which I encourage all of you to try to obtain, I've been posting some on my Facebook, and it should be republished, actually. It's actually, no, it's as an appendix. The 65, 90 pages of the Nepali Hazurbani are printed in the my new book, Yogmaya and Durga Devi. Again, it's available on Amazon. So if you read those, any of you, you will understand how it affected me. And then, as I say, when I presented this to Dr. Gurung and Parizat, they immediately reassured me that this was something really profound and I should pursue it.
Okay, did you know about this Jal Samadhi thing before, or have you heard about these practices anywhere in the world?
No. There was not. This is you're talking about 1980, and everyone the government suppressed it. I mean, can you imagine, as Professor Dunbar said, I mean, this, the 68 people made Jal Samadhi, and this was an attack. When a leader martyrs, it shames the government, doesn't it? And the government wanted to completely crush not only the movement, but to crush the news, the sacrifice that she had made to challenge the leadership. So it was completely hushed up. People knew, but they wouldn't discuss it. No. So no, it was really, I'm not being overly modest. I stumbled on this, but I was ready in my own life, and I met the right people, at the right time, and the rest is known, right? But the story's not over. Other people must continue this work, and they will. They will.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your time, your contribution, and your association with our all things and these female heroes, and making them to know to the world in some extent. We are always credited to your contribution. I think we should wrap up this session now. Thank you very much, everyone. तपाईहरु सबैजनालाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद जसले
थ्यांक यू जादुजी
एकदमै हाम्रो डम्बर सरलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद उहाँको समयको लागि पनि
यहाँहरुलाई पनि
हामी
धन्यवाद
यो अब अनन्त हो यो सुरु गरेको छ यो कुनै न कुनै प्रसंगमा आज उठेका कुराहरु अन्त्य त भएनन् होला यसलाई अगाडि नै बढाउनु पर्छ होला कुनै न कुनै सेसनमा लगेर कतिपय कुरा आए पनि कति कुरा आएनन् पनि अब यो अर्कैतिर पनि जान्छ कहिलेकाहीँ जे होस् सबैजनालाई सुनिदिने सबैलाई धन्यवाद बोलिदिने सबैलाई धन्यवाद अनि यो प्रोग्राम अहिले जुन भएको छ यो सेसनको रेकर्डिङ चाहिँ नेपाली पोस्टको युट्युब च्यानलमा गएर सुन्न सकिन्छ अनि नेपाली पोस्टको वेब पोर्टलमा पनि त्यसको लिंक भेटिन्छ यो हाम्रो 30औं प्रोग्राम थियो हामी हप्ते पछि अब कार्यक्रम गर्छौं यो 30औं प्रोग्राम थियो हस्त सबैजनालाई धन्यवाद
हस् धन्यवाद नमस्कार
थ्यांक यू बारबरा जी एन्ड डम्बर जी सबैजना अनि यतिका बेर 3 घण्टा भयो होला लगभग 3 घण्टा भयो 3 घण्टासम्म धैर्य धारण गरेर सुन्ने मुख्य हाम्रा श्रोताहरूलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु हस् आजलाई यति नै फेरि अर्को साता यसैगरी नियमित कार्यक्रम लिएर हामी उपस्थित हुने नै छौं धन्यवाद
हस् नमस्कार
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Look forward to working with you in the future and being at the university.